I had a message from, oh, Dominic is there. I was going to say I had a message from Dominic saying I am in the meeting, and I thought I couldn't see him. He's just being, doesn't have a profile picture, such a shy man.
Just hiding in the shadows, Mark.
There you go, denying us your visual.
It was too early in the Seattle morning for you to be confronted with this.
Good morning. Welcome to Karanga's second conference on social emotional learning in 2020. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm one of the co-hosts this morning. Thrilled to have participants from 33 different countries, truly a global community trying to make the world a better place. It's my pleasure to be starting this conference with Mark Sparvell from Microsoft Education and with Matt Pearsall from Committee for Children. And we have 5 partners that are offering this opportunity today. Karanga, who many of you know now, is a new organization. It's a global alliance for social emotional learning. We're doing our very best to create a network that allows for discussions on social emotional learning globally. Our second partner is Knowledge Hook, and Knowledge Hook is a Canadian digital math company, and they are doing great work in thought leadership, and you'll see a little bit more from them during the session with Andrea Schleicher later on. And the third partner is Salzburg Global Seminar out of Salzburg, Austria. They are a not-for-profit with fellows from over 180 countries. I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who's going to say hello from Committee for Children.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us all today. So I'm joining you all from Committee for Children. Committee for Children is a nonprofit based in Seattle, Washington, with a mission to foster the safety and well-being of children through social emotional learning. We're one of the leaders in the field in using a unique comprehensive approach backed by solid research and connections to experts in the field to bring resources to schools and districts across the United States and around the world to help students build their own social emotional skills and well-being. And in addition to that, we are also very active in advocacy and helping to pass policies and legislation to support SEL, bullying prevention, and child protection. That's us, and I'm super excited to be here and to get to participate and hear a lot of the speakers that are going to be talking today.
Perfect. Hey, thanks so much, Matt. Thanks so much, Jen, and welcome to everybody to the SEL in Education to the 2020 virtual conference here for Karanga. My name's Mark Sparvell. A welcome to you from 2 organisations. So the first organisation is Microsoft in Education. You know, we're particularly interested in how technology can be used to humanise learning, not just digitise content. And we're, happy to be partnered with Salzburg Global Seminar and their work around social and emotional learning, and also represented on the steering committee for Karanga. So that's one of the organisations. The other organisation I'm here representing is the SEL in Education Group. You can see the logo in the bottom right-hand corner. This is an online community of practice that kicked off from the Salzburg Global Seminar focused on social and emotional learning a couple of years ago, and has grown since then with a partnership with Committee for Children to over 6,000 energised educators from across the globe who come together to share best practice, share resources and research. And we would encourage you to join the SEL in Edu group. So that represents 2 of the other organisations. Jen?
Thank you. That's great. And we are going to hand it over to Dominic Register, who, like myself, is a member of the Executive Committee on Karanga, and he will introduce you to our first keynote speaker. Over to you, Dominic.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everyone. Let me add my welcome to this Karanga SEL in 2020 conference in partnership with SEL and Edu, Committee for Children and Knowledge Hook. My name's Dominic Register, and I'm a Program Director at Salzburg Global Seminar and also part of the Executive Committee for Karanga. I read a great blog recently about online convening, and we are all doing so much online convening and gathering at the moment. And this blog was specifically about active listening in online engagements, and it included a brilliant definition of active listening taken from immersive theatre practice: to go into the experience with the intention of being changed by what will be said. Now, there are about 300 of us joining the first part of this conference across multiple platforms at the moment, and what we will hear and learn together today has the potential to change us all. As we are all well aware, we are in the midst of a moment of great and profound change. There is the global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has the potential to change education systems for the better. And there are the protests against racial injustice and discrimination, inspired in many countries around the world by the Black Lives Matter movement in the USA. All of us involved with Karanga and the other partners believe that social and emotional learning has a key role to play in helping build back better education systems after the pandemic and in addressing longer-term structural societal issues around racial injustice. And these will be two of the major themes running through today's conference. Social and emotional learning cannot happen without context, however, national or local, socio-political and racial context. And the adaptation and contextualization are crucial to social and emotional learning interventions achieving their full potential. Crises, like the one that we're in the midst of at the moment, can act as fuel for the imagination. And in amongst the trauma, fear, anger and anxiety around the world at the moment, there are grounds for optimism. Progress is being made in the fight against injustice in many places, and we are starting to see a new understanding or consensus emerge that focuses on a different kind of purpose for education, one that emphasizes empathy and compassion amongst other things, behaviors which are the bedrock of many SEL programs. Analysis from UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report has shown that in the first 100 days of this year, 90% of learners worldwide had their education disrupted, and 188 countries had shut down their school systems. This is unprecedented in all of our lifetimes, and the fact that it is happening at the same time as a concerted wave of protests against injustice creates a space for creating education systems and societies that are fairer and desperately needed for our interconnected, globalized world in the 21st century. A minute ago, I mentioned the immersive theatre technique of active listening as a way of going into an experience with the intention of being changed by it. It's now my very great honor to introduce the first keynote speaker in today's conference, Aparna, someone whose voice is so important and who is driving and catalyzing change in many different ways. Aparna is an educator who's worked across public and private sectors at the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and program strategy, evaluation, and organizational design. Aparna will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, and we will then have about 15 minutes for a conversation and a Q&A. So please post questions in the chat or the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. So Aparna, to you, please.
All right. Thanks, Dominic. Good morning, everybody. Grateful to Joanne McKeegan and others in the steering committee for their invitation today, and also for trusting me to kick off this morning talking about decolonizing education. Today, you'll hear from a lot of experts in the field of social emotional learning. I'm not one of them. 15 years ago, I did a short stint as a fourth grade teacher in West Chicago. It was a really different time than today. We didn't talk openly about racism, and I was the only non-white teacher in my school. My teaching career came to a screeching halt when I told the principal that we ought to change the bell schedule to accommodate a large majority of students who were late daily because their parents worked third shift at a factory. Regardless, my class that year did really well, and we had some of the highest scores in state standardized tests. Not that that's a measure of success. A few years later, I was hired to lead after-school programming in South King County, which is in South Seattle. It was a really, really hard job as a 25-year-old working with immigrant and refugee youth from all over the world, but in particular from Somalia, from Ethiopia, Cambodia, young people whose parents had fled wars, young people who were growing up in big families and in a city with a fairly segregated school system. I had a singular goal when I started that job. I wanted these young people to graduate, and I wanted them to have some post-secondary options. I was looking at a dismal 2% on-time graduation rate when I first started this job. 2 years later, 100% of these young people were finishing high school, and nearly 80% were heading off to college, many to community colleges, nursing and trade schools. Some folks went to four-year universities. It's been a really long time since I've worked with kids. I left that job to start my first company and entered the world of adult learning. But in preparing for this morning and my time with you all, I took a moment to reflect on those years of 60-hour work weeks, trying to get young people to the finish line. And in hindsight, what I believed to be the finish line. I took a little bit of time thinking about what makes educators successful. And it dawned on me that it isn't a list of 10 things or a set of 5 competencies that makes educators brilliant. There's no perfect curriculum. There's no tool, there's no app. What makes educators really great is their ability to see themselves in their students, see where they have privilege, see where the young people have unearned disadvantages. Great educators, most often unknowingly, know that guiding young people is an adaptive challenge. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we're looking to fix adaptive challenges with technical fixes. And this is, in my opinion, one of the many failures of our education system. A technical problem is something we've encountered before, where the solution is really apparent and we have experts or authority figures who can fix it. So getting a rocket into orbit is a technical challenge. But an adaptive challenge is one that requires changes in people's priorities, beliefs, habits, and ultimately loyalties. The expertise of people in authority is simply not good enough. And it's one that requires a bit of trial and error and generative thinking. So I'm here to talk about the shifts we need to create to decolonize education and create a world that works for all learners. I know just a few minutes earlier, I said I don't believe in the checklist manifesto, but I want to talk to you about 3 things this morning. 1, how we recognize our privilege and positionality as educators. 2, the tough conversations we need to have. And 3, how we become allies to young people. So first things first, let's talk about privilege. I'm going to share this framework with you that you see already, and I invited to adapt it to your own needs. It was originally developed by Dr. Leticia Nieto to help us understand how each one of us has identities that offer us unearned privileges and others that carry unearned disadvantages. As you look at this, where do you find yourself? Do you have privilege of fluency in English? How about socioeconomic privilege? When I looked at the list of speakers for today, I saw a lot of experts based in the global north. Now, think for a moment about where your students might be. Who does your organization aim to serve? And where do they fall? This framework is a really powerful reminder of the disconnect between our lives and those who we want to serve. In the areas where we have the most privilege, I would argue, we also have our biggest blinders and our biggest blind spots. It's near impossible to meet the goals of social emotional learning, let alone the goal of decolonizing education, without a framework like this and an explicit focus on issues of race and ethnicity, socioeconomics, and class privilege. In the United States, where I'm speaking from, regardless of the race and ethnicity of students, teachers tend to be primarily white and female. 15 years ago, I was the only person of color in my teacher education program. In graduate school, I was just one of 2 students of color in the entire school. So what do? We can't just fire all the white educators and white experts. So I'm going to invite us to consider that we need to start having some really tough conversations. In this moment, as Dominic said, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. For the very first time in our shared lives, we're experiencing collective global trauma. Months of social distancing, wearing masks, social isolation. Many of you are parents who've suddenly been faced with the task of homeschooling while working and a myriad of other tasks. This moment, for me, has laid bare the deep inequities, regardless of where we live and work. In the United States, this is more apparent, I think, than elsewhere. The US has about 5% of the world's population and 25% of all global infections and coronavirus-related deaths. We also have roughly 25% of all imprisoned people, and most of those in jails and those who are dying are Black and brown, and often tend to come from lower socioeconomic brackets. In the US and elsewhere, we've seen mass protests in the past month against police brutality and racism. So some of you on this call might be sitting back and thinking, well, what does any of this have to do with education? I think in this COVID moment, it's possible to see how our institutions are deeply connected to and responsible for racism, xenophobia, and widespread discrimination. While anti-Blackness is a truly global phenomenon, how we educate and care for young people that are lower on the socioeconomic ladder, are Native or First Nations, is deeply problematic. And I don't think that anyone is exempt from this. There's no country that has it right. The history of schooling itself is grounded in colonization. For too long, we've used education as a tool to assimilate. Too often, we've used schooling to strip young people of their identities. And assimilation, as many of you know, doesn't work too well. Suppressing people's identities comes at a cost and consequence. So our role in this next phase, I'm going to suggest, is to be allies, advocates, and champions. So what's an ally? An ally is someone who is not a member of an unrepresented group, but one who takes action to support that group. An ally is somebody who uses their power, position, and influence to champion others. My invitation to all of you today is to find your path in being active allies for young people. No one here is in active opposition of these ideas, but many of you are passive when acts of oppression take place around you. Some of you are neutral. You don't believe that you need to take sides. That's not enough. You have to take a stand. If you aren't fighting so hard for young people that you might lose your job, then you're probably not doing enough. What does this look like? It looks like actively championing for their needs, making sure that your organizations reflect the communities you want to serve. It looks like stepping back and handing the mic back to young people. Being a great ally to young people requires some of the very same SEL skills we want young people to embody: self-awareness, social awareness, and responsible decision-making. I want to end my talk today with a quote from Arundhati Roy's "The Pandemic is a Portal." She says, "We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it." Decolonizing education is going to require all of us to give up our beliefs about what truly works to build a better new world that values all lives equally. Thank you.
Aparna, thank you so much for that. There's so much to reflect on and think about. Some questions are starting to come through, but just to give the audience a bit of time to shape their thoughts. I wonder if I could ask you a couple, first of all. I think for all of us, we'd be really interested to know about some of the actions that you've seen active allies putting into practice already, and what are the strategies and actions that you've seen to be most effective?
Yeah, great question. So what are strategies that allies are putting into place right now? I think the best thing that an ally does is when they offer up their power, when they share the stage, when they share the mic. I've been working for a very long time as a person of color in mostly white organizations, and great allyship looks like a leader standing away, a leader giving up their opportunity for keynoting a global address, and making room for young people, and I think making room for explicitly for people of color.
Do you see that happening at the moment? Do you buy into the idea, or do you recognize the idea that we are at this moment of great and profound change, or is there, significantly more energy that needs to be put in to education in particular, because that's our focus today, to help drive that kind of change?
Well, Dominic, I think that's a leading question. I think that there's so much more we need to do, quite frankly. When I look at who's speaking on panels, too often I see a lot of white folks. I see people who are experts from institutions in the global north. When I look at who's shown as an expert in education, so often it's people who quite frankly don't have the expertise. We find ourselves at a time where we believe that we have the right to guide young people in areas where we don't have any lived or work experience. I see a lot of folks in the United States. I think this has been really clear, where we have 40% of the population that is Black or brown, but 85% of the teachers are white. Almost all education institutions are led by white individuals. I think at this conference, a lot of organizations who are sponsoring have white leadership. And so have we done the work that we need to do? No, absolutely not. I think there are a lot of people probably who are on this call today who have to ask themselves, am I the right person to do this work? And really dig deep to find out, whether they can sit with the reality of the response.
There's a lot for us all to reflect on in that answer. So thank you very much for that. There's been a ton of questions coming through while you've been talking. So I'd like to bring in a question which is up on my screen at the moment, which is about, so from Neha Gehlot, and it's about creating spaces where we begin with what the community needs with regards to SEL. And are you seeing, or do you have examples of good consultative practice to bring in more voices into the reform agenda and driving change?
Absolutely. There are a couple of things that I've seen that give me a lot of hope. So many of our organizations are funded by foundations and philanthropy at large. And so one of the things that I've started seeing in recent years is philanthropic organizations actively divesting from employees that don't have lived experiences in the areas where they're making grants. And so in this case, into education and to SEL specifically, and starting to restaff with people who mirror the communities that they aim to serve, communities where they're making grants. And in particular, I think in the United States, the Bush Foundation and Meyer Memorial Trust have been incredible, where over a period of 5 years, they've, significantly diversified their teams. I think Ford Foundation is another leader that has restrictions on term limits for program officers. So that's one area. I think other areas where I'm starting to see change is community-based organizations that are compensating young people and community leaders to come into strategy sessions. So as they think about, their 2 to 5 year plan, they're bringing in those community voices, they're compensating them, and they're creating accountability mechanisms. So it's not just that I asked somebody from the community to come have a chat with me, but that I am accountable and responsible for actually taking some of that feedback and putting it into action. So yeah, I do think that there are some really great examples happening across the world.
Brilliant, thank you. I suppose I'm interested in hearing also about examples where you've seen leaders using their privilege to pair up with people from different backgrounds. So as well as, like you said, ceding the leadership position, also working to learn publicly and bring more leadership voices in. And do you think, is that a legitimate strategy in your experience at the moment?
Say that again?
Is that a legitimate strategy to be bringing in more sort of pairing and couplings of leaders from different backgrounds?
Yeah, absolutely. I think earlier I said that, in areas where we have the most privilege, we also have the biggest blind spots. And I think when it comes to education, and I reflect, just even on my own experience, we're at a place in time where we're not going to fire everybody who doesn't reflect the community. That's not real. That's not possible. And so I think that, grooming people, co-directorships are really powerful ways to lead, because we do need people that come from traditionally, historically marginalized backgrounds to gain both hard skills and soft skills for leading the world and for navigating what I frankly think is a political hot mess of a situation. So, so they need that. I also think that it provides opportunities for some reverse mentorship. How do we expect our leaders to get a beat on what the experiences are of people who are closer to the ground if they don't have those bonded relationships? And so absolutely, like, leadership pairings are an incredible way to make this happen.
The idea of reverse mentorship is gaining ground at the moment, isn't it? And it feels to be one of those ideas whose time is coming, and we're seeing much more widespread adoption of it.
Yeah, and where I'm seeing it the most, quite frankly, is with my corporate clients. I'm seeing it happen formally and systematically with folks that are in the private sector, because I think that the urgency is felt so much more deeply in the private sector. They are looking at the world and realizing that 20 years out, who does the work is just going to look fundamentally different. And so they need to start making those investments and investing in those shifts today. I honestly wish that educators felt that same sense of urgency as they look at the shifting world and their role in guiding young people.
I think for a long time, there's been a characterization of education as being a sort of fundamentally conservative sector and slower to embrace reform and change. And so it's really interesting to hear you bringing in examples from the private sector where there's more urgency from a variety of different starting points to embrace that kind of change. Have you had the chance to reflect or to put into practice in your work sort of incentive structures to drive that kind of change in the public sector?
What are the incentive structures? Well, I think ultimately it comes down to, market share. Are you going to do more of or sell more of a thing? Well, if your audience or your consumer is shifting rapidly, then you need to make sure that you're building products for them. You need to make sure that whether it's an app or it's a service or it's a material good, that it matches their needs. And most of us vote with our wallets, and it becomes really apparent. So I think for the private sector, the incentives are really clear. There is a very real profit motive that's driving a lot of the change. You know, I would be lying if I said, well, they're just, you know, at their core, such good people. And many of them are really great people. But also I think that there's a very real profit incentive. And where I think there's, you know, like lag time is in the social sector, and specifically in education. We've had organizations who've been on the leading edge of products and services. We've used the same textbooks for the last 20 years. When I look at what young people, kids of my friends are reading today, it's almost exactly the same as what I was learning. And we have the same card decks, and we have the same guides and the same worksheets that have now been translated into 7 different languages. Well, that translation often doesn't account for the needs of different target geographies. And so I'm curious to see, you know, the conversation that happens today, and really like how we start to incentivize this sector to show up and do better.
So if you were, in every one of your answers, there's so much that we could talk about and take the conversation in different directions, but sort of interested in going a bit deeper on what you said about curriculum, for example, as being one of the, I suppose, one of the structural issues that needs to be addressed at the moment. And do you see an appetite for curriculum reform at the moment? Because the private sector analogy works so far in terms of people voting with their wallets and things like that, but actually driving through curricular reform and addressing the representation in textbooks, for example, is an issue that's been debated for a long time, but I'm not sure if as much progress has been made as could or should have been.
Oh, that's a hard question for me to answer if I was going to be totally honest, because I'm not as plugged into the world of K-12 education in the last couple of years. I mean, certainly I see lots of really amazing educators, especially young people of color on Instagram, who are creating really wonderful learning content and making it available for free. And so like, that's an area where, you know, I in fact go to find resources, and I go to find inspiration. Is it happening wholesale? I don't know. You know, I haven't seen any real indications. What I do see happening is that we take a lot of ideas that have been developed in the global north, and we're marketing them pretty heavily to organizations in the global south. And yeah, will that change? I certainly hope so. Do I think that people in country are ultimately the experts in developing education systems? Yeah. There's always something beautiful that happens when we collaborate with people from other parts of the world. But I think for way too long, we've taken a lot of the ideas that we think work in the global north, and we export them to the global south. And yeah, that's actually something that I would like to see change.
One of the things that we've found with Karanga, and I think one of the reasons why social and emotional learning is such an exciting education reform topic at the moment, is that it feels like there's a kind of genuinely equitable space for knowledge exchange that doesn't always exist in other areas of education reform. So you have got amazing SEL innovations coming from countries that are OECD members or typically do incredibly well in PISA tests or other international comparisons. But then you've also got spectacular and really powerful innovation coming from majority world or global south countries. And I think one of the things that we hope we can do with Karanga, and that the SEL and Edu community is incredibly powerful for, is creating the space for that kind of knowledge exchange. And are you seeing that happen in other areas of life, or do you see, you know, in the private sector, for example, with your corporate clients, is there a willingness to look at other markets and learn about more equitable practices from other parts of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is happening in a big way in the private sector, you know. But I think going back to, you know, the role that Karanga can play and is in ensuring that all voices are equal and all voices are normalized. You know, so I think about like a lot of global platforms and a lot of global convenings. We walk into a space, the expert list seems to be pretty consistently the same group of people that we see speaking at conferences. And they're, you know, often sharing similar things. And in a world where we want to create equity, there are a couple of things that are really true. In order to create equity, somebody has to give up something because we don't live in a world with an infinite amount of resources, right? We live in a world where many resources are finite, budgets are finite. And so what goes to make room for equity? I think that's something that we have to think about. And that's something that, quite frankly, I see a lot of the private sector organizations focusing on and shifting. An area where that happens, that's super concrete and in some ways both superficial but also really valuable, is around professional development budgets. Right. So in an equality model, everybody gets the same amount of money. That's typically how it works, even in schools and a lot of nonprofit organizations where, Dominic, you get $2,000 and I get $2,000. And I mean, we're talking a very generous sum of money. For many organizations, $2,000 is probably their entire organization's professional development budget. And we go and we spend it in a way that we think is going to help us. But the reality is that we all come from such different places. I may not need that amount of money, right? And so if we move to a skills-based or a competency-based way of thinking, even about professional development, then we are making really deep investments in staff that we want to upskill, so that we're all punching and we're all doing our best work possible. And typically that's not a thing that happens, right? Like, I want to keep my pot, I want to hold on to it, and I want to get better and better. And that likely means that I get promoted and now I'm in a decision-making position, but I've left so many people behind. And so I share that example because it's something so tangible, it's so tactical, that any of the organizations who are listening in today could implement that.
One of the things that's coming through in the conversation is the sort of way in which you're identifying critical levers for change, I suppose, within the wider education ecosystem. So there's the sort of points that you made about recruitment at the beginning and about the optics around who's standing at the front of the classroom. And in the US experience, you said typically white by a big majority. Then there's also the sort of need for different kinds of incentive or opportunity around teacher professional development. And then there's the curriculum space. You know, from your time as an educator and the thinking that you've done since then, are there other levers for change that you think should be focused beyond teacher recruitment, professional development, and curriculum?
Yeah, are there other levers for change? Well, I would ask, you know, how do we more fully live into the levers that we have now? Have we done the best job possible in teacher recruitment? Arguably, we have not. Have we done the best job possible in shaping curricula that not only reflects the needs of the learner or reflects the needs of the community, but that tells a more accurate picture of our world? Curricula that actually is positioning young people to be successful in this next phase of their life. Arguably, we have not. You know, like, when I look at math standards or when I look at progression, I'm helping my nieces and nephews with all of the same things that I did. Handwriting, you know, my God, like, is that really a skill that we need? I have some questions about whether people should be spending hundreds of hours perfecting their, perfecting their handwriting. And so I think that there's work to be done in the levers that exist now. And I think that there is work to be done in decolonizing even some of the SEL competencies that, like, I think no doubt you'll talk about. We're asking young people to do better decision-making. Well, what does that look like as adults? Are we holding ourselves to the same standards that we want young people to embody? And so I think from my own schooling, I remember the CASEL standards. That's what I learned 20 years ago. I think they're still around. You know, ideas like self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. Are we holding adults to those standards? And I would argue that we're not. So there are plenty of frameworks and tools that already exist. And I think that approaching those with a race and ethnicity framework when appropriate. So I think in the global north, that's very appropriate. A lens of caste, class is very appropriate in parts of the global south. And so can we apply a lens of equity and start having some really explicit conversations about who's been left out to better utilize the frameworks that already exist?
It's interesting how the conversation is circling back in different ways on this idea of either scarcity of space or the fact that, you know, something needs to give. And that there's a great question from Gavin Dykes in the chat about whether curriculum could be judged by the space that they leave rather than exactly what the content is, and sort of decluttering the curriculum or making space for, you know, in some cases for new ideas, but also just leaving space. As Gavin says, it leaves space for innovation of students and teachers and voices from different contexts. And I wondered, you know, your thoughts on that, and if you are seeing examples of the kind of leadership necessary to, you know, to drop things like handwriting, for example, because there are many other places where you can learn it.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that comment roll in as well. And he says, if it leaves space for innovation of students and teachers, voices from different contexts with different experiences and backgrounds. And I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. You know, I think a parallel is in food systems and agriculture. Living in Washington State, living in the Pacific Northwest, it's very rainy. There are a lot of forests, there are lots of mountains. Do I want to grow oranges here? No, I do not want to grow oranges here. They're not going to grow well here. So why am I trying to grow oranges here? There's actually no reason, right? I should grow the things that grow best here. You know, so when we look at what's the innovation that's happening in agriculture, we are growing food that is responsive to that geography, to that climate. I'm diversifying my crops. I'm not trying to grow avocados in a place where it's, you know, 50 degrees Fahrenheit all year round with rain 80% of the time. It's not conducive. And so I think, what does it mean to be highly localized and highly contextualized in the world of education? Well, I think it probably looks like ensuring that, you know, there's opportunity not only for innovation, but there is just opportunity for greater contextualization, which means that we have to give up something, right? Like we have to give up standards that don't work. We have to give up probably testing, which I've never been a fan of, probably because I don't test well. We have to give up some of these things. We have to give up what we think is going to work and really start taking some risks, because otherwise I find ourselves in a situation where young people continue to be collateral damage while we get to preserve our egos, you know? And I think we have to stop making young people collateral damage.
The testing and assessment conversation is really interesting, and I'm sort of interested to hear about practices that you have with some of your private sector clients or other people that you work with around measuring progress in this space. And you know, you obviously work with them to set a strategy and things like that. And I imagine there's been an abundance of that work in the last a few months. But then how do you help them measure that they're actually making progress with what they want to do? And are there frameworks that you found useful that you could share?
Yeah, are there frameworks that I found useful? So one of the things that I do with my clients is data-driven decision-making. I think data-driven decision-making, also very popular in education, but it kind of tends to be like a one-track situation where the data that we're gathering is standardized testing, or we're grading students. We're like grading second graders and providing either a letter grade or a number grade, and at a time where, they're developing so differently, at a time where they quite frankly don't need grades as a measure of success. So with my clients, regardless of whether it's a big company or a small company, we go through a process of really understanding the landscape of who forms the organization. So we survey employees at all levels. We do focus groups and interviews. I mean, really standard qualitative interviewing, 101. All of us had it, in grad school or even in our teacher education programs, right? And we co-create metrics that we are going to measure the work by, based on what comes out of that landscape study. And so what educators can take from that is, do you know who is in your organization holistically, right? Do you know what are the mindsets of teachers? Do you know what are the capacities of students? Are you looking holistically at what's going to make somebody successful? And are you developing metrics that are relevant to your institution? And with my clients, I ask people to think sort of in three buckets. One is personal beliefs, behaviors, priorities. And so this is all of the culture stuff. Management consultants love to use the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If your culture isn't good, the best strategy, the best curricula, the best frameworks, they're not going to work. So what is the culture? We ask our clients to think about policies and processes. And so what's impeding progress? What is a barrier to inclusion? In a lot of schools around the world, hitting children is still allowed. That is a barrier to progress. We can't learn when we're being struck. We send a lot of kids to detention or other kinds of really horrible punishment, not conducive to learning. We have schools that still look like jails, also not conducive to learning, right? So along with a number of policies and practices, bell schedules are the most ridiculous thing. Who designed them? Did adults design them because it works for them? Yes, we design bell schedules because they work for us. They don't work for learners. If we designed even a bell schedule for a learner, we wouldn't start high school before 9 o'clock in the morning. They're not ready to be up and learning at 6:30 or some other super early hour, right? Like we would create more time for recess. And so what are the policies and practices that are barriers to learning, right? In your institution, in your geography, in your neighborhood. And then finally, what data do you need to collect to make some really smart strategic decisions? Are you collecting year-on-year data on the race and ethnicity of teachers and like the comparative success that they have in their classroom? I know that we do know now that when an educator looks like the majority of their students, those students are going to be more successful. And we've had that knowledge for a very long time. So why have we not used that as a yardstick to measure the success of our institutions? And so those are the three areas that I push my clients to focus on. But ultimately, I'm asking my clients to co-create metrics that work for their organizations. It would be crazy if the metrics that Microsoft uses for success are the same ones that a shoe factory in Spain is going to use for success. Not relevant, not relevant. So do things that are relevant for your organization and use data to guide your decision-making, not use it to be punitive.
Yeah, the cultural context is so important, and lots of what you said there circles back to your experiences when you were a teacher in that school where the students were punished and put in detention for being late. We are very sadly out of time for this conversation, but thank you so much, Aparna, for giving such a strong opening to the Karanga SEL and Edu and Committee for Children conference. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and wisdom. And there is so much for us all to reflect on, both as educators and representing the organizations that we do in that. So thank you very much, Aparna.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It now gives me enormous pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Louka Parry, who's going to guide us through the next session. So Louka, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dominic. Some wonderful insights there from Aparna. And that really does link beautifully into our next conversation, where we'll have 3 short presentations from, thankfully, very different parts of the world, which will be followed then by a bit of a discussion. And of course, we'd love to pick up any questions that you might want to pose to this panel, particularly as they all play different roles across the education and policy ecosystems around the world. So this session is entitled SEL and Social Justice. So before I launch into it, I just want to undertake an Australian protocol, which is to acknowledge the traditional country on which I am presenting from. I'm here in South Australia on our family farm, and I want to say Nina Mani and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm joining you all from, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And realize that this conversation is just one conversation that is taking place across tens of thousands of years of wisdom sharing on this particular ancient land that I'm lucky to live on. So as we move into this particular conversation, we want to discuss SEL and social justice. And we have 3 wonderful discussants, presenters that will be part of this. First, we have Professor Stephanie Jones, who is joining us from Cambridge in the United States. Stephanie is the director of the EASL Lab. She's the Gerhard S. Lesser Professor in Early Childhood, and will share some wonderful insights. Stephanie, looking forward to hearing from you. We also have Dr. Anantha Duraiappah, who is the director, in fact, was the foundation director, the inaugural director of the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education and Peace and Sustainable Development in New Delhi, India. And I'll give a bit more of an insight when he moves to share his presentation. And we also have joining us from South Africa, Ammaarah Martinus, who's the Director of Policy Research and Analysis at the Department of the Premier, the Western Cape Government in South Africa. I'm Louka Parry. My role is frankly just to moderate and to be able to draw out some of the powerful insights that we'll hear from these 3 different and really wonderful thinkers, doers, policymakers, practitioners, doing some really remarkable work across the world. So what I'd love to do is to hand to Stephanie. I'll tell you a little bit more about who she is before as she gets her slides, to share some of her insights. Professor Stephanie Jones is, in all honesty, one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. But she also has a phenomenal amount of experience in the field of social emotional learning. Stephanie's research is anchored in prevention science, focuses on the effects of poverty in particular and exposure to violence to children and young people's social emotional behavioral development. She has a doctorate in developmental psychology from Yale University and is a university member of the Council of Distinguished Scientists for the National Commission on Social, Emotional and Academic Development, convened by the Aspen Institute. Stephanie, I yield the floor to you to give us some insights into the future of SEL, its intersections, the insights and innovations. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Hi. Thank you. So you can just nod that I have it all sorted. You can hear me and you can see the screen. Yeah? Okay. So thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it, and it was very kind. So I'm excited to be here and to talk about this stuff, which is I'm loosely calling the future of SEL is now, intersection, insights, and innovation. And the reason that I titled this way is because what I see and what I hear is that social emotional learning, that broad umbrella that is social and emotional learning, is now. It is really important now with the huge variety of challenges and opportunities perhaps that we are facing. And so what I thought I would do in my 8 minutes, and I'm going to time myself because I have too many slides and I want to talk about too many things, is to really do two big things. One is to just review some basic concepts about SEL as a setup to talk about some new work that really has to do with intersections with other fields that are doing really important social justice, anti-racism kinds of work, and to link that to innovations in practice that I think are critical to the now. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go fast. I will share the slides. You can peruse them in detail later. Okay, hold on. There we go. All right. So the first sort of backdrop idea is like, what is social emotional learning? What are social and emotional skills and competencies? And this heuristic is from the Aspen Seed Commission, developed with the support, collaboration, collective effort of many scientists, practitioners, educators, policymakers who came to sort of a consensus about this idea. And what you have is a set of skills and competencies in the center in cognitive, emotion, and social domains. Surrounding that are a set of attitudes, beliefs, and mindsets, sort of how you think about those skills and about yourself in the world. And then on the other side, character and values, the guideposts that drive action. And then all of that is situated in experiences, learning settings, and relationships. And I have found this heuristic to be really helpful in thinking about, like, what is this stuff? How does it go together? And what influences it? So this is sort of like, what are we talking about, I think, when we're talking about SEL? Okay, if you want to look at more of that stuff, you can go to this website that organizes the frameworks, that dominate the field, connects them to each other. And it's super fun to just click around, but it's a way to go deeper into these ideas of skills, competencies, attitudes, beliefs, character, values, and so on. So that's the sort of the what. And then now, what's effective in practice? Over decades of scientific enterprise, of developing practices and strategies and supports, what actually is effective? On the one hand, we have establishing safe, caring learning settings. So places where all children feel welcome, that they belong, that they will be safe, that the environment is predictable, consistent. Establishing this demands attention to systems of inequality, systems of oppression, systems of racism. And this is where we get intersection with other fields outside of SEL. But the key point is that we can't just talk about our local classroom. We have to really think about how all of this is situated in systems that keep people apart, that put people down, that oppress. Okay, that's one side. The other side is instruction in social emotional skills in a manner that engages students and gives them agency. So this is teaching about social and emotional phenomena. These two parts are obviously closely related to each other, but that instruction demands today, in particular, that we think in new and innovative ways about practice. We need more effective, more scalable, more relevant, locally, contextually relevant approaches. And this is where we get to innovation in practice. These two are connected to each other, as I just said, and in kind of interesting way, in their intersection, they are all about foundational relationships, about how people, kids with kids, adults with kids, adults with adults, connect and support each other. So all of this is really rooted in a system of high quality, connected, supportive, reciprocal relationships. And I would say in this world, that demands attention and support for adults, because we typically jump over the adults to get right to those kids. And I think in the prior session, we were hearing a fair amount about this idea. Okay, so that's the supports, what's effective. A quick pivot to the role of stress, because everybody around the world is facing, I would say, new, heightened, and complex forms of stress. There's a lot of work on stress that's out there. I will not get into all of it, but there is a body of evidence that describes different formulations of stress that range from tolerable with support to toxic, gets into the body and affects physiology. What we know is that toxic stress can take many forms. On the way right, we have what we typically expect, which is traumatic experiences can generate toxic stress. If you just jump sort of toward the middle, also persistent chronic exposure to exclusion, to derision, to negativity. Even small, subtle forms of each of these can generate toxic stress. We also know that children and adults who face these kind of toxic levels of stress really are at high risk for challenges in the social, emotional, and behavioral domain. That's the decades of science side of it. The other side of it on the practices and strategies is that we know practices and strategies in social and emotional learning are an effective and really critical response. So they are the now for the stress that the world is under right now. That is the key response. Okay, so now quickly to the intersections. I think I still have a few minutes. I think I'm okay. Okay, good. So in our lab, we have been thinking about how do you create safe, caring, supportive environments? And how do you think about SEL in relationship to other fields that are really fundamentally about dismantling systems of oppression? And we've been thinking about the intersection of social emotional learning as a field with social justice education as a field. And I'm going to start with one side, which is the social emotional learning side, which, you know, at its core has always been about educating the whole child, right? We have the whole child. All this stuff that you see on the screen is about SEL. We know about all this. Everybody who's interested in SEL knows these kinds of things. Pivoting to the social justice education side, which is really about educating all children, we have these core ideas. We live in a society where resources are unequally distributed. This results in differential experiences of power, privilege, and stress. In the US, urban schools are often embedded in communities that face persistent environmental stress. We know that children cannot learn and cannot thrive, and adults cannot learn and thrive under these conditions. So to meet their mission, schools and other learning settings must provide access to culturally relevant, responsive, and flexible support services. So we've been thinking about, like, how do you get from whole child, or how do you bring together whole child approaches with all children approaches? And we came up with this kind of idea of equity-oriented SEL as about these two worlds coming together. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, and I can share a draft paper for those who are interested in reading the sort of noodles of some of these ideas. But we spent some time in this space, and we developed a kind of framework for practice that would bring us closer to equity-oriented SEL, which is really about educating all children as whole children. That's the sort of bottom line of that thinking. We came up with a model like this. Everybody's got a pyramid. Even we have another pyramid. This is the pyramid that we're working with right now. I wish that I could come up with something better, but it does have this, it evokes this idea of like having a foundation. Anyway, at the bottom, we have foundational adult competencies, which is at the center about living, warm, demanding, reciprocal relationships. To do that, adults need to think carefully about how to shift power, how to give power over and allow power to happen in other places, and to be really deeply, critically self-aware, to reflect and see their positionality in the system. That demands some formulations of self-regulation. At the top, we have a set of supportive practices, that adults engage in with kids and with other adults. And this is about predictable and inclusive norms, structures, and routines, multicultural, multimodal activities, lessons, and content, and then individual supports when needed. So happy to talk about this more if anybody is interested. Now, quickly, innovation and practice, and then I'm going to be done. We've been working with a model that says we have lots of curricula, and that is great. Most of them, the vast majority, developed in the US, implemented in US schools as an add-on to existing instructional practice. That's this. It's not good enough. That's a harsh thing to say because it's not implemented in the manner it was designed or tested, and it's not getting deeply woven into the lifeblood of interactions, schools, schooling, learning settings. Our notion is that we need something different that's more flexible and more doable. Strategies, and we're thinking about strategies, practices that are common to effective programs or something that might represent effective ingredients that are targeted, very specifically focused on specific skills and are relevant to different settings and can be deployed by adults, about adults, or adults with children, and are designed to be doable, integratable into instructional practice, efficient and scalable through things like this. We have to think new. How do you do SEL on a screen? How do you do SEL over Zoom? Could you do it over the radio? And that demands that we think carefully about insights that are relevant to settings and needs. We've been doing this, we call them SEL kernels, and we're doing them in different places around the world. I welcome any partner who would like to do this with us. We would like to do it with you. The bottom line is that we need to, across all of these big ideas, sort of return to some simple notions that I think represent intersections and innovation. One is that it seems complex. The words can be complex and mixed up. What sits underneath them are things like listening, looking and noticing, reflecting, and then grappling with those things that we see. Down at the bottom, we have very simple notions of caring, stepping outside ourselves and caring, and then doing, not just caring, that's not enough. We have to do things. And this, in my mind, for SEL, means building, testing, contextualizing approaches that can be embedded in systems. There are system type approaches in settings, instruction, the things that exist that are currently oppressing and dividing people. That's it. Thank you. I know, a little bit long, sorry.
Stephanie, it's always fantastic. And every time I hear you speak, and I'm graced with that opportunity, you know, quite often, I always step away learning something. And I love this idea of, you know, all children as whole children, and really that intersectionality that I think is crucial. How do we enable people to bring themselves into education environments? And I want to really unpack a few of those ideas when we have a bit of a conversation amongst the three presenters.
I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. So this idea, particularly around the dissonance, the idea of grappling, there's a beautiful segue into Anantha's work. And so Anantha, I'll invite you to get your slides ready and turn on your camera if I can see you there. And as you just find those slides to share your screen, I'll just introduce Anantha. Anantha is the director of in fact was the inaugural director of the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. It's based in New Delhi. He began in that role in 2014. He's a science policy pace setter. He has 33 years experience, which he doesn't look at all is the case. He now plays a key role in positioning UNESCO MGIEP as a leading research institute on education for peace, for sustainable development, and for global citizenship. He has a PhD in economics, specializing in mathematical modeling at the University of Texas, and he's of course authored numerous peer-reviewed books and journal articles, and presently sitting on editorial boards of a number of peer-reviewed journals. He's a fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the World Academy of Sciences, and a visiting professor at the University of Tokyo. Anantha, thank you so much for making the time and joining us from New Delhi. I'll hand the floor to you.
Okay, I think I've unmuted. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So one of the good things with COVID is that I was not allowed to trim my beard, so you can see quite a bit of growth over the last 100 days since the lockdown. And I think we're going to go for another 30 or 60 days in India as the numbers spike. So that's my own personal challenge. Well, thank you, Louka, for those kind words. I think I have to talk to my comms team about cutting down and trimming down that introduction. It's kind of embarrassing to a certain level. Let me, I think Stephanie plays very, very well in terms of the SEL and its role. What I thought I would do today is to sort of say why it's so important in the field of social justice. And when Louka sent me this challenge, I was intrigued because as an economist, and I hope nobody holds that against me, but as an economist and trained in a very traditional neoclassical discipline, and spent many years primarily looking at a traditional macroeconomics, development economics, started moving into the whole notion of social justice when I saw that many of the things that we had, many of the models that we had were not working. And it never did. And so I dropped the whole mathematical modeling to a side. And then I had the opportunity to meet with Amartya Sen, and then started working and looking into the capabilities framework, which leads very closely to this whole social justice discussion that we are having today. Now, as Louka has said, I'm at the UNESCO Institute. It's what we call a category 1, which is an integral part of UNESCO. But I started with my UN career at United Nations Environment Program, and then moved on to the United Nations University, primarily looking at ecological systems and the whole notion of the relationship of humans with nature and so on. The one thing that intrigued me and kind of sometimes frustrated me is that when we look at the problems that persist, poverty, inequality, especially now growing rapidly, and I would like to replace the word equality with equity. It's a lot much richer in that way. And then when we look at solutions, a lot of times we already have those available. If you look at the UN, in a sense, the Human Rights Charter, we have protocols, we have conventions to our eyeballs. Every time we bring an issue, hey, we have it. It's on the books. We've got countries convening. We have the International Court in The Hague. We have all the mechanisms, and yet again and again we see violations on a daily basis, and that frustrated me. And I was kind of wondering, and then the lens that I looked on was from a very economic, rational lens, and sort of saying, what's going on? And then when I took over, or when I was asked to lead the Mahatma Gandhi Institute, it's interesting. Every time you move, you learn new things. And this was a journey for me into the world of neurosciences and social and emotional learning. It was a fascinating 6 years, I got to tell you that. Some of the stuff that we economists don't even think about, although we think that we are supposed to understand human behavior, but we sort of simplify it and sort of say that we are all rational. Now, when I started looking at this and then looking at some of my previous work during the time with Amartya and others, I kind of thought about, hey, the problem here is that what we have is a legal perspective. So let me go to the next slide. So what we have when we talk about social justice is a push for an egalitarian society. Yeah? That's what we are trying to achieve. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about where the problem arises So for me, the main approach or the main means that we have taken has been the human rights approach, the use of legal instruments, governance instruments and institutions. I use the word institutions here in a very political economy definition is the formal rules and norms that govern us as societies across the world. We have national as well as global, and we have done well. I think we have done well in terms of developing these over the last 60 to 70 years or even more than that. Now, these are necessary. I have to say that that's why I emphasize that we have made strong strides in advancement. These are necessary, but what I say is they are not sufficient. I'm looking at it from the experience that I've had in the field. And so I bring in the moral rights approach here, and I'm going to draw on the Kant moral imperative, or what he calls as the categorical imperative. And so this is where it's not, the problem with Kant is that he then based it on rationality. And so if a person is rational, then the moral imperative or the categorical imperative automatically comes into play. Unfortunately, we now find from a lot of the recent work by Dan Ariely at Duke as well as Daniel Kahneman that we are predictably irrational. The rationality model is just completely thrown, and with the prospect theory that Daniel Kahneman had put in forward, it just turned up economics upside down. So we have to live in the world of irrationality. And so when we have the world of irrationality, and then we, let me just move to the side, we have this whole notion of dissonance, because we unfortunately live in a world where it's primarily a utilitarian system. It's very individualistic. If you look at the capitalist market society, it's a very individualistic society. And so something is happening.
It's okay, Anantha. I've just taken over your slide deck so that we can move you through. They weren't changing from your side, that's all.
He
lost if you keep speaking, I'll move us forward. All good.
Right. Good. So where are we now? It's now on. Could you move it to the navigating the cognitive dissonance?
Yes, here we are.
Yeah. So here we are. So the conundrum that we have is we want to talk about social justice, which we are focusing more, which requires an egalitarian society. But on the other hand, most of our policies that we tend to take is primarily based on a utilitarian society. And so therefore, what we are faced is that this whole conundrum, and we get into this dissonance all the time. And a simple example is, agreeing to do something, but knowing that you're not going to do it to achieve something else. And that's something that we face on a day-to-day basis. And the unfortunate thing is it becomes so natural for us that we totally forget about what the moral imperative that we need to do. So what I'm proposing here, and this is, I think it will go well, is that the social-emotional learning is what is necessary to build that moral imperative. And I'll tell you why. So are you controlling now? I don't control anything on mine. So the next slide, please. So some of the, like Stephanie had already talked quite a bit of this. I think the slide before that, Louka. So social and emotional competency, some of the ones that we talk about, the previous slide, Louka. Yeah, so, many of you will recognize some of these: self-regulation, emotion regulation. I see people sort of saying SEL is very individualistic, but first, SEL also requires empathy. And empathy is the relation with the other, trying to understand the other from their own perspective. And I think that's one of the toughest and the most difficult socio-emotional competencies that we have to achieve. And then compassion. Some of the work by Tanya Singer's group at the Max Planck Institute, where they talked about empathy distress and how you can overcome that with compassion. The need to change, the need to act, that's very important. There's no point about being empathetic to somebody and then just go about doing what you want to do. The compassion part, do it, action. Like what Gandhi says, be the change that you want to see in the world. You got to do it. Even if it's a small part, action is important. And then the critical inquiry, the cognition is extremely important. And so we put it that, and it's familiar, and it's a common thread across all the different frameworks, as the one that Stephanie had put earlier. The SEL also has academic as part of that. So it's not just on the social side, but it's also on the cognition part as well. They kind of the whole brain approach, if I can use that. The next slide, please. I'm kind of gone really way above my time. I'll try to finish this off very quickly. So education and SEL, I want to sort of say the sensitive period, early childhood to 24, we're just coming up with a study where they're trying to get the highest ROI. I can't get away from my economic training. And so this is where the highest ROI. But for old guys like me, the good news is neuroplasticity is always there. So we always have a chance. So we are not a lost cause. And I would like to say I'm a perfect example where I've learned even at the ripe age of 60. So lifelong learning is important, and SEL can be built all the time. The last slide, please. So I want to finish with a call to action. Let's mainstream SEL. That's kind of UN language, Paula. Mainstream SEL in education systems. It's not something on the side. It has to be mainstream. And I would say, I use the word systems. So it's not just about curriculum. It's not about just teacher, but the whole education system, right from administrators down to the teacher, to the student, and the environment. Thank you very much. Sorry for I've kind of gone 2.5 minutes. I apologize, Louka. I'll try to pay off in a trade-off.
Not at all, Anantha. Thank you very much for that perspective. And I think it's fascinating to note that, that your role as an institute, the idea of social justice really is being kind of hardwired in. And so in some ways, Stephanie, coming from the other angle, which is quite interesting, in terms of the intersectionality. And so that's something I also want to unpack also. As we move into, I'll just make sure that I'm no longer sharing my screen. So we have one final presenter who's going to share some thoughts, and that is the wonderful Ammaarah Martinus, the Director of Policy, Research and Analysis at the Department of Premier and the Western Cape in South Africa. So Ammaarah, as you get ready, I'll just provide a little bit of insight. And the one thing I would say about the amazing presenters is all three of them are members of our steering committee here at Karanga. And so we absolutely love the work that they do. And you can tell that they really are kind of, pushing the edges of what's possible in terms of policy design, and in terms of, getting to that key point that both Stephanie and Anantha have picked up, which is action. How do we drive action? How do we create space that actually enables us to shift in a powerful way? Ammaarah, I've only just met last week, but she already has impressed me with her amazing insight into behavioral insights and behavioral economics. And Anantha, you picked this up as well, with some of the Daniel Kahneman work. How do we design policy so that it actually changes things on the ground? And so what I'm going to ask Ammaarah to do is to take us through, the view from the Western Cape there in South Africa, share some of, the insights in terms of how SEL has been reducing inequalities, how it might be one of a range of things that we can put in place from a policy perspective. Ammaarah, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Louka, and hi to everybody on the call. So I thought I would start with really just introducing, where I'm from and what we do. And so I think, for us in South Africa, and in particular where I sit, which is in the Western Cape, is that what we find is that poor children and youth in South Africa are not just poor. They also experience sort of multidimensional poverty. And this is what this slide says. So it really disadvantages them further. So what I mean by this is that not only are you a poor child, you also have low quality schooling. You have limited access to information and connectivity, limited access to social networks, and then also perhaps coming from fragile families. And so what we did is that we took our multidimensional poverty index and we basically said, how does this actually look like for the Western Cape, where I'm from? And we found that about 23% of our youth population in the province was multidimensionally poor. So that's a quarter of all young people in the province, which is absolutely shocking. And so what we said is that we know that we come from a very unequal society. And we wanted to really come up with solutions which speaks to our young people's lived realities. And I think this is important because sometimes as policymakers, as practitioners, we go into the field thinking that we know what is best for young people. And quite simply, we don't. And we then got approached by one of our local universities to really say to us, we are thinking about, running out an intervention looking at growth mindset. And we then thought that this would be a really good way of actually addressing some of the most marginalized in our province. What we then did, and I think this slide really shows you, is some of the thinking we've been doing in terms of our theory of change. So what we are saying is that if we improve social and emotional skills, you really will be able to improve learner academic outcomes. Why this was really interesting for me in particular, it's because we want to make sure that we are nurturing aspirations. We want to make sure that people's grit, perseverance, and ability to really look at long-term goals are actually achieved. And the one important thing here is that a lot of the kids that I work with, one of the things that they don't have is self-efficacy or self-belief. They don't believe that they can do better for themselves. They don't believe that they can leave the place that they've been. And so this was a no-brainer for me to actually do. And when I looked at the actual intervention, so this slide really gives you a bit of an insight into how the program actually worked. And just to say that it was a partnership between the World Bank, UC Davis University in California, as well as ourselves. And you'll notice that the baseline and the end line was really for us to measure outcomes. And we did this through a maths assessment, a survey, and a puzzle. The intervention itself was really a 5 times 3 minute videos. So we basically showed learners in high school and primary school these 3-minute videos, and we did it in a treatment environment where it was a growth mindset video versus a control environment, which was just basically animals. And so here you'll kind of see how we've weaved in behavioral science into the intervention that we actually did. We followed this up by reinforcement videos just to make sure that the kids actually remember what they've learned, because often they would leave and they would go on holidays and forget everything that you've actually taught them. Then moving on to the results. So we had very good results in our high school. We saw a 10% increase in their maths mark. And this is significant because it's really comparable to almost 2 to 4 months of catch-up. What we found in the next year, and our pilot basically lasted for about just over 1 year. And we saw a 17% increase in the last year of implementation. So for us, this was phenomenal. We never expected this. We never thought that it would even work. And so for us, this was really something that we could say, actually small intervention, low cost, fun videos to watch, but actually people were really engaged and we saw the results in terms of outcomes. I must just note that this impact only held if you attended all 3 sessions. So if you went to 1 session or 2 sessions, then it would not work. So dosage, very, very important. So then just to take you through some of the ways that we as the Western Cape government have thought about making the case for SEL. And I think what's critical about this is Anantha mentioned the thing about mainstreaming. And I want to tell you and share a bit about how we actually approached it. So the first thing, we need to get buy-in from our core stakeholders. One being policymakers, and how we did this was to really show the evidence. We needed to show that actually we needed to treat social and emotional learning like a hard skill, so maths and science, because often it's seen as a soft skill, and that's completely not what we felt. So we had to show an improvement in the academic outcomes despite learners' circumstances. We specifically chose schools in our poorest communities, low and no fee schools, so that we could actually show that it doesn't actually matter where you come from. What matters is that you're actually given the tools to actually see how you can progress through social emotional learning. Our second big stakeholder was learners. And so here we really needed their buy-in as well. So that what we insisted upon was that we needed to have relatable videos and also relatable facilitators. So people from your community. So Aparna mentioned in her opening about who do you look like? You know, how do I relate to you? So if you're coming in from the suburbs, you obviously don't have anything in common with me. And we needed to also show that no matter where you come from, you really aren't a product of your circumstance. The third and most important thing is about the idea about mainstreaming. And so here we worked exclusively and extensively with our education department because we wanted to take the learnings and the lessons from the pilot to scale. And so this meant making sure that SEL was part of the curriculum, not just additional curriculum or after school curriculum, but core curriculum. And so with that, we really started to think about how can we actually use plans for SEL in the future. And currently what we're thinking about is to really think about how SEL can assist with violence at schools, trauma-informed education, through cognitive behavioral therapy. And so building on these previous successes to actually help marginalized learners cope with trauma. And one of the things that I really want to leave you with, the first takeaway for me is that we have to ensure that opportunities are equally and consistently provided. So when I say consistently, I mean all the time. Don't parachute in and expect a miracle. It's not going to happen. So this has to be done no matter what or how difficult or inconvenient it is. So whether there is gang violence or protests, you need to make sure that you are running your program consistently. The second thing is about really bridging this digital divide, especially for poorer communities. So what COVID has really thrown up for us is that those that have and that have not. And so you really need to make sure that you actually are including those people at all points. So if there are no computers, you make sure that you're actually having stuff printed for kids. And the third thing for me is about really acknowledging that implementing social and emotional learning is not easy. And we need to shift our own mindset as practitioners, as teachers, as policymakers about how we actually implement programs, how we design programs, how we think about programs. And this is important. We need to check our biases first, and we need to change ourselves before we can even think about making changes in others' lives. And I think the last thing I want to share with you is that what COVID does provide us with is a unique opportunity to really ramp up our social and emotional learning. There's lots of uncertainty, lots of crisis, and I think it's a golden opportunity for us to really think through and take this forward as a collective. So I'll stop there and I'll just leave you with some of my contact details if there's any follow-ups that you'd like to make. Thanks, Louka.
Thank you so much, Ammaarah. Oh, we had 45 minutes each because there's so, and I've just been following the chat and the questions, and there are so many questions that we want to get to. We are going to go over time because I do want us to have an opportunity to have a bit of a conversation. So Anantha, if you're still there and if you turn on your camera, we will have just a quick conversation together. Feel free to pose questions to each other. I'm going to start us off, however, because we have quite a globally representative panel here across 4 different countries with different work. And so this question actually speaks to the idea, and Stephanie, you might want to answer this first, but I think all 3 of you can pick it up, which is this idea of, when we look at some of the frameworks, they are very individualistic. And Ammaarah, even the concept of growth mindset, how do we bring together this idea of social justice being about a collective, about all kids? And, Anantha, you made the point about equity as opposed to inequality. So how do we kind of do that work well when we look at dosage and we look at growth mindset or self-actualization? How do we move into collective actualization, if we put it in that term? So Stephanie, just your quick thoughts on that, and then I'll just Ammaarah and Anantha, just jump in as you feel is required to share your insight.
So I could not agree more. First, both in the kind of characterization of the majority of frameworks as focusing on individual skills and things that individuals can do, and really fundamentally leaving out aspects of the setting, the context, the experience that enable skill development, support folks to act in the ways that we hope, wish, and want to support them to. So that is absolutely the case. And I think that there's, all of this in the context of having spent maybe 10 years coding frameworks that explore the SEL site, like a kind of ridiculous, crazy activity. I feel like we have a good sense of what's in them and what's not in them. When you really look across frameworks, there is an emphasis on things people know how to do, like knowledge and skills and competencies, but there really is a lot of emphasis too on values and beliefs and aspects of interactions and collaboration and those kinds of things as well. What really is missing is some careful distillation of the conditions in settings that enable those other things to thrive. So that is really absent from the framework. Sometimes there's text that situates a framework in an idea, like this is all embedded in a setting and features of the setting, but those, like what that looks like and how to generate it, is absent. And that's an opportunity for this field, is to put some lines in the sand about like, what are the conditions? What do we expect settings to look and feel like? What do systems have to do to enable all of this other stuff to happen? And like, put it down, right? Write it down, because once it's out there, you can't avoid it, or you can, but it's harder.
It's harder to avoid it. Yeah, the idea, like what do we pay attention to, I think is partially this. And I think both Ammaarah and Anantha, you talked about in some ways incentives, right? So, like how do we incentivize people to move into this kind of collective space? And if COVID has done anything, it's really shown that we are all in this together, if we like it. And so what's your musings on that kind of collective and individual piece, knowing that equity is a collective destination that we might only get to together?
Thanks, Louka. I maybe just want to come in. So for me, I think just to also touch on the point that Stephanie made about frameworks. And I think that one needs to understand that a framework is just one of the tools in your toolbox. And so nothing in a framework is going to help you when you're out in the field. So yes, it might shape the way that you go in. It might give you some guidance as to the possible things that you could do. But one of the things that I've learned, and especially in the work in schools that I've done, is that, nobody starts, or everyone doesn't start at the same starting block. And so you first of all need to understand that is your point of departure. And so once you understand that, for me, it's about then getting everybody to everybody else's condition. And so if I'm comparing schools that I work with in townships or informal settlements versus those that I work with in the suburbs, the kids in the informal settlements need to come up, so they need to get to a point where we can actually start talking about, okay, how can we implement this framework? And before you even talk about a framework, you actually need to get to the point where you're providing those opportunities to those kids who might not even know that they are worth actually having those privileges. And I think that, it's very hard, it's very difficult, because it's not only changing their environment, their physical environment, but it's about changing what's in here. And I think that mindset and about how people feel about themselves is a difficult thing to change. And why I made the point in my presentation about being consistent is that young people need people in their lives that are regular and consistent. If they see that you're coming in and you're leaving 2 weeks down the line, they just throw their hands up and they lack motivation. And I think that that's one of the key things, and why our programs are not 3 or 6 months, but they last for many years, because it's that, grasping onto consistency, grasping onto perhaps a space where they feel safe. So that would be, from my point of view.
Anantha, anything to add here, particularly in terms of, incentives? We live with this kind of economic paradigm, which is all about the individual in many respects, in many societies anyway. And, we are seeing interesting new models emerge, like the donut economics model from Kate Raworth, for example, the idea of circular economy. But how do you bring together kind of the role of the individual, but also, also to make it not just inclusive, but actually driving a very strong equity imperative?
So the notion of, so in many of the SEL frameworks, collaboration is taught a lot. And it's, when you look at the frameworks, you got collaboration and stuff. One has to be careful. What is the end goal of that collaboration? It could be very instrumental. In a sense, the collaboration happens because of self-interest. And I think that's something that we need to move away from. And rather, collaboration is as a constitutive element of your own flourishing. And so to collaborate with somebody else actually contributes to your own flourishing. And one of the things that fascinated me in terms of, from the neurosciences, in terms of how doing something good actually triggers a lot of neurotransmitters that make you very feel good. And if you talk about feel good, which means your whole notion of flourishing has been achieved. So I think it's as Ammaarah has talked about, there's a mindset change. I'll just tell you a little example, and I think one of the things that COVID has pushed in terms of the notion of digital, and this is where the new challenge, and it's kind of oxymoronic if you look at it at the beginning, that you talk about social-emotional learning and then you're talking about digital. It's like, guy, hang on, aren't this supposed to be with people? But I'll tell you a little bit of a project that we had, and it's kind of, we did it for about a year and a half. And Ammaarah, South Africa was involved. A couple of schools from, 5 schools from South Africa were involved. We had schools from Japan. We had schools from different parts of the world. And we talked about the issue of migration. And so what we did was, through the dialogue and through the modules, we introduced the whole notion of some of the mindfulness activities that you see in SEL, especially when things get heated up. Sort of said, okay, guys, let's take a break. Let's settle oneself, start doing a little bit of mindfulness activities, get the emotion regulations underway and some of the self. But then we do a lot of empathy exercises on trying to understand from the perspective of the others. And it was interesting to see how different the perspectives of migration were among these different groups of children from different countries. These were basically grade 8 to 10 from these 5 countries. And we did some pre-assessments of some of the social-emotional using some games that have been developed over time. And then we did a post-assessment as well. And we saw some changes in terms of how empathy has improved, some of the other elements. But just the perspective of looking at migration was really interesting. Even within India, where we had kids from very, very poor backgrounds in the slum communities and kids from a very rich community. The thing that boggled me and in fact fascinated me was when kids from the rich schools were saying, hey, kids from slum schools are actually very smart. I was like, what? This was the perception that they had. And then the whole respect for migrants really jumped. And in fact, kids who had migrant parents started understanding and respecting the kind of work that their parents had to do, which were basically, very menial labor, garbage collectors and stuff. Because then we asked in the dialogue with a critical inquiry, what happens when nobody picks up your garbage? These are important jobs themselves. And so the level of respect and understanding of others' plights and how they are part of the system, like Stephanie was talking about, the systems are important. And then when you get into the systems, the complexity just multiplies. And I think we need to sort of try to simplify that, and some of the basic competencies that we need to build into that automatically will jump in. But it takes a long time. And I agree, Ammaarah, I sort of say, I take a different approach with soft skills. I say soft skills are much more difficult because they're malleable. because I do martial arts quite a bit for the last 20 years. When you're hard, it's easy to break. When you're soft, it's very difficult to touch you. So soft skills are what I sort of say are the really strong parts of this whole SEL approach.
That's a wonderful metaphor, Anantha. I hadn't heard. Go, Stephanie, jump in.
Okay, so I know we're over time, but I just wanted to say a couple of things about this conversation, which is super interesting because we're all grappling with the individual inside a context or an ecosystem. And we've all touched on it in different ways. And I just wanted to echo a couple of the points, which is that there is a whole body of science, of science and human development, particularly human development in context, that describes peer effects, compositional effects, which suggests that who you're with, the collective you're learning with, is more influential than your individual skills, than the stuff that you bring into the equation. And that work, while in all kinds of areas, is underappreciated in these conversations, I think. So we really do have to think about, the individual in a setting, going all the way back to, Yuri Bronfenbrenner and like the real ecosystem. So that's one thing I think is that we're all kind of grappling with. The other is that I do fear that if we default to an individual approach, and in our work, we often do this, like in our lab, we are trying to build skills in individual kids without attention to the idea that what if you support growth mindset, but there are no opportunities, right? Have you done harm in doing that? And that's the part that, and I'm not, I'm just raising it as something that we all have to grapple with, which is that we want to not do anything, but we also wouldn't want to set kids up in a way that ultimately could be harmful to them. And this is where like the field of SEL has really been grappling itself, which is like, where could it be as implemented in the way it is understood and operationalized now, a harmful thing? Like there's a lot of writing about that. And I think we have to like query that, sit with it and try and understand what it means for what we do and where and how. So thank you.
That's so interesting. And what a way to close out our conversation, Stephanie, with, again, like the biggest unanswered questions that we have. And frankly, just shows the dynamism of this work, I think. I would like to leave you with one insight from Lila Watson, who's an Aboriginal activist here from a state called Queensland. And I think this really sums it up. And it sums up even Aparna's wonderful keynote this morning, our conversations about really the intersectionality between SEL and social justice education and equity. And it's simply this: if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And I really think that really is the part. And be they peer effects, Stephanie, from the literature, be they, what does a community look like? I think that's a really fascinating question. And I would, on behalf of the entire conference, for people who've been watching, just thank all three of you. There are about 10 questions we haven't even got to. So I wonder if I might be able to email them to you, and perhaps we could even include them in the next newsletter. Some of your synthesis, perhaps your resources, because the chat has been going absolutely ballistic with requests for them. And of course, if you want to receive the newsletter, you can go onto the Karanga website and sign up. It's magically free and happens every month. So again, Stephanie, Ammaarah, Anantha, thank you so much for sharing your work, but also delving into this important conversation with us all.
Thank you.
I will hand you back to Matt. Thank you very much. Matt, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. This has been an awesome morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you all are. We're going to step away from the live conference for a few minutes to something that I'm really excited to share. These are a chance for us to get to see some strategies from the field. Let me bring up my screen. So We've worked we've put a call out to educators around the world through our SEL education community and the Gulbenkian Foundation to ask for educators in the field to share their own tips and strategies around how to implement SEL, how they're actually doing it on the ground with the children they work with. And so I'm going to be sharing a few videos here. We're going to have some more videos coming in the afternoon session. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to this, and this is all going to be kind of raw, unedited stuff directly from them to us. Oops. Pardon me while I get this sorted.
Matt, while you sort that, I'm just going to make a quick plug for, oh great, it looks like it's popped up.
It's coming.
Excellent. So just to reiterate, because we've had multiple questions, yes, there will be a recording of this conference available, and we'll post it on the YouTube Karanga Global YouTube channel. You can see all of the resources, both in the SEL and EDU community of practice, but also on our website at Karanga, Karanga.org. Over to you, Matt.
Great. So without further ado, here are some practices from the field, and we will be back in about 15 minutes to pick up with the live conference. Bear with me for a second. Zoom makes you go through an extra step to actually share your sound. And I got to remember how to do this. There we go. I'll start over again.
Hello everyone, I am Gunjan Tomar from India. I am so happy to be here with you all. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Karanga Global SEL Conference for creating this platform for educators to share their good practices. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I am Vinita Garg and we are so excited to share with you all our strategy to address social justice by integrating responsible decision making, an important component of SEL. So here we go. So our strategy is to address social justice by creating a community of responsible decision makers who are equipped to make ethical, constructive choices about personal and social behavior. Justice delayed is justice denied. It is effectively the same thing as having no remedy at all. Justice hurried is justice buried. When we think about this, it makes us understand that hasty decisions may lead to unproductive justice. This video of ours is an effort to create or work towards creating a community of responsible decision makers to make this world a better place for all. We all have it in us, and we all can do it collectively as a community. Presenting our activity to let students understand and reflect on what social justice is all about. Analyze these images and empathize to understand what they are reflecting. Choose any one image and record your understanding on Empathy Map. But before moving to Empathy Map, let's analyze what empathy involves. Put yourself in the situation of the picture chosen, understand and connect with it using Empathy Map. Your next step will be to reflect, analyze, synthesize and evaluate the information to create or derive a solution that can help the world to change. You are a responsible decision maker. After solving this problem, ask for people's perspective about the same. If majority of them go with you, you are ready to go for it. If not, reconsider your solution. You have it in you and you can do it. Now you are good to go. Congratulations. You didn't delay the justice and you didn't hurry to make decision. So a well thought and balanced approach has made you a very important member of the community who is called a responsible decision maker, who will help others to join this community to make world a better place for all. Going further, let your voice reach masses. You have the ability to change the world to make it a better place to live for all. Remember, life was, is, will be beautiful always by practicing responsible decision making. Thank you.
The Bioscola program consists of an offer of environmental education and promotion of scientific culture provided by the municipality of Lousada to all local schools. It aims to encourage the commitment of young people to environmental issues and to urge knowledge, values and responsibilities for the protection and conservation of nature. The program is directed at all school levels, from kindergarten to secondary, and since we work with the same group of children over time, we had a perfect setting to evaluate and measure the pedagogical effectiveness of the program, both on short and on the long run. Thus, in partnership with the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation and its program, Gulbenkian Academies of Knowledge, we intended to implement the Wallis Problem Solving and SSES, Study on Social and Emotional Skills experimental methodologies, respectively to kindergarten and primary schools. These experimental methodologies aim to assess whether environmental teaching interventions within a school context generate greater cognitive development, an aggregation of emotional skills, the development of problem-solving competencies, and, in general, if the program contributes to the growth of a set of skills that allow for a better social involvement and self-regulation as part of the child's development. With the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting change in the school paradigm, and due to the unpredicted confinement and restrictions to physical contact inside or outside the school settings, the Bioscola program had to adapt. In such a unique situation, the aforementioned evaluation methods are impossible to implement with children. So, in order to continue to stimulate the target audience with ecological content and understand if there is indeed an improvement in the children's social skills, namely the problem-solving capacity, we have to completely redesign our approach. To this end, we proceeded with the creation of the Bioscola channel on YouTube, where we continue to promote environmental education through videos which content fit the official syllabus for each school level and subject tackled. After watching the videos, the parents are asked to assess if and how the program had an impact on their children. For this, survey links are available at the end of each video. Additionally, some subjects and classes were delivered by video on streaming. In this option, that was coordinated with each responsible teacher, environmental content was delivered in full safety, online, but maintaining an interactive dialogue and the bonding that the children had created with the Bioscola tutors. Obviously, this and other forms of program monitoring are an adaptation to this new reality, and these monitoring mechanisms do not fully replace the previously proposed ones. In this time of social distancing, it becomes now urgent to adapt and overcome, keeping the students socially and emotionally engaged to our program and to the whole community. We now need to evaluate the impact of the program on their social and emotional skills during these distancing times. This assessment and validation will allow us to obtain even more robust results, which will allow us to test and understand if an integrated environmental education program boosts indeed a greater cognitive development regarding emotional competences, more specifically regarding problem solving. This way, Bioscola and similar projects can contribute to a greater social health and self-regulation of children in such difficult and disturbed times.
Hi. My name is Kaylin, and the strategy I'd like to share with you today is called the Self-Regulation Toolbox. I'm a kindergarten teacher, but this is something that can be easily used and adapted for young learners all the way up to adult learners. The example I'm going to show you was co-created within my kindergarten classroom this year. And just to give you an idea, I would probably introduce this strategy a few months into the school year after students have already developed a vocabulary about emotions and feelings and noticing a little bit in their own bodies and brains how they're feeling. They would have already also had some guidance and some experience in different self-regulation strategies. And so that's why when we get to this point about October for me, when I ask them, what are some ways that make you feel better and make you feel ready to come back to learning when you're feeling frustrated, angry, silly, too excited? They came up with this list all by themselves. You can see that some things are going to be special and specific to materials I have in the classroom, but most things are very easily adaptable for any classroom. And after we create the big brainstorm together, what I do is I give each child a copy of this sheet printed off, and I allow them to pick and choose the strategies that are going to work best for them, because obviously we're all different as humans, and different things are going to work in our own independent realities. So the children will cut and paste them into a card, and we keep them easily accessible inside the classroom. After that, either during practice time, they're invited by myself or another teacher to take their card and practice some of those strategies when they're feeling dysregulated. But what's also really exciting is that they're able to do this independently, and it really builds their independence in recognizing feelings and emotions and being able to do something about it. The children realize that they have agency, which is awesome. Just a warning, you will find when you first do this that all 20, 30 children in your class are wanting to use their toolbox at the same time. But trust me, with just some gentle guidance and allowing them to experiment for the first few times, they will get more independent and they will recognize when they really need this. So that is it for the regulation toolbox, and I hope you enjoy applying it in your own classroom.
Hi, I'm Babu Matthew, Senior Researcher at the Center for Advanced Research in Socio-Emotional Learning, based out of Cochin in the state of Kerala in India. Our organization has been involved in the educational transformation of a few indigenous communities in 2 districts of the state of Kerala for the past few years. These communities speak a language without a script, and more than 90% of the elders have not attended school. Decades of deprivation, social isolation, and educational backwardness have made them vulnerable, and the community members often fails to cope with the challenges of the 21st century. Under such grave circumstances, it becomes imperative that we build a sense of self-belief, collaboration, resilience, and a powerful urge to dream be instilled in the minds of the children. The idea was to use education as a tool and SEL as a platform to bring about social justice to the indigenous communities. We chose 100 grade 5 children every year, and these children were provided a 750-hour weekend knowledge interactions over a 10-month period. An initial screening revealed the fact that almost all the learners had grade 1 skills in both language and numeracy. We visited their families to understand their living environment, had empathic telephonic conversations with them every week, and had informal family gatherings every month. The children were received on their arrival by the mentors. We dined together and engaged in socially and emotionally validating conversations with each learner. The academic environment was fully collaborative, process-oriented, and each learner was provided with learning material that was suited for their current ability levels. The children were also provided opportunities to have informal interactions with professionals from various walks of life. The children, after completing 500 academic hours, appeared for a few national-level competitive examinations to gain admission to certain fully residential state-owned public schools. And many of the children began to clear these examinations and gain admission to these prestigious institutions. The learners also designed an evolving textbook wherein the entire content is created by the learners. The families of these children are provided with positive happenings in the academic, social, and emotional realm of the children on a regular basis. This gives the families a sense of self-respect, and they start believing in their children. Over the last 5 years, we have managed to reach out to 500 plus families, and more than 20% of our learners have been placed in various residential public schools. The learners have overcome the challenge of the indigenous language and have begun competing with children who have better access to resources. The families are taking the initiative to reach out to schools, has regular interaction with teachers, and is seeing this as an opportunity to get onto the mainstream. The SEL embedded learning environments has provided us the opportunity to awaken the passion for learning in these young children. It has helped us connect with the community and understand their problems, and is creating a path which goes a long way in helping the community identify and problem solve many of the ills that they are facing right now. We are helping ensure social justice through this SEL initiative. Thank you.
So those are some of the videos that we collected. We are going to be showing more of them during the next session. And of course, I put a link in the chat where you can go see all the videos we collected and add your own if you have SEL strategies that you would like to share. We are using Flipgrid as the platform for gathering all of this. About to go back to the live session. And before we do, I wanted to remind everyone that after this session is over, we're going to be having another session over at hosted by Knowledge Hook, starting at 12 p.m. Eastern time, and so we'll be going over there. I need to throw the link up for that. The link is going to be. I will put the link in the chat in just a second while I dither over it, and in the meantime, I'm going to turn things over to Carine Allaf, who's going to be the moderator for our next session. So Carine, without further ado, take it away.
Thanks so much, Matt. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this session on SEL and education in emergencies. All of the panelists, including myself, come from backgrounds of working in education in emergencies and conflict contexts. But in today's world, we suddenly find that the whole globe is in one way or another been thrust into the education and emergencies world. So in places all over the world, COVID has added to pre-existing crises. And in others, COVID has been their first taste of emergencies in educational contexts. So today, as we sit here on this in this beautiful, wonderful virtual conference, and no matter where you live, you surely have been part of the conversation related to education in today's COVID world. And in addition to this public health pandemic that COVID has caused, it's also shed light on the fissures that have existed in our society for decades. This has revealed that perhaps in contexts like the United States, that were normally not really defined as emergencies pre-COVID, there's been an overt or perhaps even covert crisis that's been raging on for decades. What's happened to George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the hundreds of others are clear examples of a dire emergency that continues to rage on. Racism and anti-Blackness are very real emergencies that strongly exist, not only in the US, but also globally. So these should give us all pause and really drive our thinking on how we structure and build our education responses, both in the short term as a response currently, but also in the long term too, and as of the often used term goes, truly build back better. So today's panel specifically hopes to address these various issues, drawing on the expertise of our wonderful panelists and to specifically address what we can learn from the work that they've been doing in education and emergencies for the reality that we find ourselves in today. At this point, I'd like each of our panelists to introduce themselves and also just say a little bit about where they have worked and the contexts that they're drawing from. So if I can have all our panelists put their videos on, and Omar, kick us off with your introduction, then Emiliana, and then Gerhard.
Hi, everybody. My name is Omar. I'm the head of education at Mercy Corps, Iraq. I've been working for youth and education for the last 8 years, and in Jordan, Greece, and finally here in Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Emiliana Rodriguez. I'm the Director of Education at Atentamente. Atentamente is a non-for-profit based in Mexico, and we have been focusing on developing, implementing, and evaluating social and emotional learning programs in Mexico, mainly at the hand with the authorities, with the Ministry of Education.
Yeah, hi, my name is Gerhard Pulfer. I'm a portfolio manager for education in displacement at Porticus. And I don't have an education background. I come more from a governance field. And so it has been a fascinating journey for me to go into education and to see the power of social and emotional learning and psychosocial support.
And I'm Carine Allaf. I'm a senior programs advisor at Qatar Foundation International. QFI is a member organization of Qatar Foundation, and we are based in the United States. I've worked in education emergencies field in a variety of contexts, from Lebanon and Jordan, Sudan, to Iraq, to Sri Lanka, on a variety of projects, but also being a teacher. And now I'm sitting in a different seat as a mom of a school-aged child in New York City, trying to deal with the COVID response as well. So we want today's panel to be an open discussion, a little different than a spectacular panel that was before us. So I urge the panelists to talk to each other, agree and disagree, pose questions of each other. We're also going to leave a good amount of time to take questions from all of you listening to us. Thank you for joining us. And a big thank you to Faye for compiling those questions and sending them our way. And also, if any resources are cited, we'll be sure to compile those and make sure that they're shared also after this session. So to kick us off, I'd like to pose the question of, can you give us some specific examples of social emotional learning approaches that have been used in your context, in the context of education and emergencies, that could possibly be used in today's COVID world and the realities of our world today? And I think what's best, maybe if you guys all go on unmute yourselves so that it can flow as a conversation. And if there's any background noise, then we can adjust accordingly.
Cool. So I'll start, and then great. So I'll start. I'll just talk about, and I'm sorry for starting with a little bit of a depressing statement, but COVID-19, for education and emergency, identified a lot of gaps and needs that it was not focused on previously, especially for such disruption of education. And if you can allow me to separate now between like what have been done for education and what have been done for social, emotional, and psychosocial support. And for education, one of the gaps that was discovered is the contingency planning for the education systems, or from the government, from the community, on the contingency planning for such emergencies, for such education disruption, and how also after we had this this emergency, most of our education actors, they switched to use online platforms. They identify online platforms in order to be to continue the education journey. But in emergency, that also shaped another challenge in a way that I'll talk about Iraq, where 47% of population, they have access to internet and they have access to online. And that means internally displaced refugees and returnees, they can secure access to internet in order to continue their education. And this is where we start looking on other platforms, and from a cluster efforts with other organizations, we found out that 97% of Iraqis are using televisions and have access to televisions. And this is where, as Mercy Corps in our program, we worked with the Ministry of Education in order to have an education channel, and we support them to build studios in order to broadcast all the classes virtually through the TV. And also by working with the Ministry of Education, most of the teachers and counselors, they start help reach out to students in order to make sure that they are attending those classes. Beside education, that's the last thing, but beside education, also talking about social emotional learning. One of the things, I'll start like this, but one of the things that we discovered is, so in emergency, as Stephanie mentioned in the last, in the previous panel, that we do have individual approaches, but in emergency, conducted individual approach, it's a little bit like a beautiful red flower in the middle of a desert, right? Like by time it will be impacted by its surrounding environment and then collapse. And this is where all of us, when we talk about social emotional learning, we associate it with skills, but also it shows us that it's a time that we talk about social emotional learning as individual skills, and it's a family environment, and it's a community culture. So working to enhance the individual skills, also we bilaterally, we have also to make it or to identify its cultural parameters, and also how we can equip family to create those environment at home. And this is what I've been doing also through the TV, by having our counselors go on the TV and talk about activities that need to be done at home from parents' side in order for their children to have that safe space at home, so they can adapt their skills and also they can learn more from them. I'll give the space to others and then we'll continue for it.
Thank you, Omar. I would like to talk a little bit about the last thing that you mentioned of social emotional learning. I mean, it's something that you have to build up, that it's developed over time. And in this sense, in like 8 to 10 years ago, we had a very big crisis in the north of Mexico. It still continues, but 10 years ago, we have this a lot of violence happening in the border in the north, in the particular state. In Tijuana, we have a lot of murders and violence against women. So many organizations wanted to do something, and that was the way that a very important program was born. That is a program called Constrúyete. So this program was born from a set of organizations that decided that they wanted to do something to protect the youth and to prevent the violence and to address this crisis that was going on in the north. And then this movement really grew, and the UNDP then adopted this program Constrúyete and also partnered with the Ministry of Education. So today, Constrúyete is a very big program that is directed to all youth in Mexico. It's delivered through high schools, and it's this UNDP and the Ministry of Education. And after the crisis, and trying to prevent and to help and to work specifically in what was going on at that moment, they decided that the best way to help was to create a prevention program in social and emotional learning. And 4 years ago, we were able to work on that program, creating a whole new curriculum and an implementation and evaluation strategy that was developed because also in Mexico, we decided to introduce social and emotional learning as part of the national curriculum. So Constrúyete became now formally part of the curriculum for high schools. And that was a big change that set up a framework and some experience in Mexico so that we now have some more tools to work with the crisis that we're living with COVID. And that has been wonderful because all that work that was done on that moment and that was built up through the years, now it can be implemented in several ways, as you mentioned. In Mexico also, we don't have teachers, for example, and families don't have internet in every house and in every place. Also, it's 50% of the coverage in Mexico, but we have been able to distribute this even through WhatsApp, which is one of the main media that people are using, and through the radio and the TV stations and many other ways. And we as a civil association, we have been also developing new content that it's very precise and can help what teachers and families are living today, but also that it's opening door to this change that we know that take more time and a whole cultural transformation.
So I think with COVID, education in emergencies has become a reality for most education systems. And it's interesting to see the reaction to that system or to that change. I mean, we have to consider that 40% of low-income countries have not been able to provide any kind of response, any kind of education response to the children who were thrown out of education as a result of COVID. But where we see responses, it's quite interesting to see how social and emotional learning and psychosocial support have been part of the response or have even dominated the response. If we look, for example, at the first emergency response packages of Education Cannot Wait, in all these requests, PSS and SEL have been essential components. And I think that is quite interesting. I think with the COVID crisis, social and emotional learning and PSS have arrived at the center of education responses, at least for education in emergencies. And they are not only now part of the response, but sometimes they are even dominating the response. Where we lack a bit of evidence is how effective are these responses if they are delivered via distance, if they are delivered via radio, via apps, via TV. Are they relevant at all in the context that children are living in? And I think it would be interesting to gather more evidence and more insights into what it does to the children who are living in these realities, and whether these kind of programs have the desired impact. And perhaps, Omar, would be interesting to hear from you what kind of measurement you have in place for your program in Iraq. But one more thing that's perhaps worth considering. I mean, what we will likely see as a result of COVID is more of a move towards self-paced, self-directed, self-owned learning. And such a move to self-directed learning will also require different skills and competences with the children. So self-management skills such as goal setting, self-motivation, self-organization, self-regulation. All these factors will be very important, as well as strong resilience in the face of external and adversities and domestic conditions at home. So all these things that will be triggered by COVID, these changes in our future learning, probably SEL and PSS will, I believe, will have a strong role in these responses.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerhard. And two things I want to mention, like responding to you. First, Gerhard, what you mentioned at the end is really interesting, and this is what we are looking for right now. Is during COVID in Iraq is one of those countries that the decisions have been made for education. It hurts a little bit because, for example, exams were prevented, and people, they were judged on their previous exam to pass the year or not. So such decision shows you that that there was no, like as you mentioned, Emiliana, there was no prevention measures. It was just response to what's going on in the moment. And one research we're aiming to conduct is, still under these environments, there was some students who were able to make it and who were able to self-educate themselves. And in emergency, this is like, it's rare to find those cases. And this is what we're doing. And speaking of measurements, is that we are identifying those people to study them, to see, like, as a successful control group. We want to see how their parents is treating them, how they're living, their economy, their livelihood, what is their personality, to identify those success factors or those emotional skills that makes them able to commit. This is like, if I want to put it general, makes them able to commit, to stay at home, and to there's no school. Like, I want to be honest with you, if that happened when I was in school, I'll never open a book if I'm home. I'll be like, just forget about it. But like those people, there's no school. Parents are also stressed and busy with life challenges, but they committed themselves to stay at home, to self-educate, and also to move forward without any guidance. And those people, we want to see what is their situation, and see what skills they got, what coping skills they got in order to overcome that stress, and also be their own and be committed. One of the interesting thing Emiliana, you mentioned is prevention, and this is again in emergency, always we call it emergency response, right? Because it is a response, but sometimes we miss the prevention part of it, where we go, we assess, we respond, but there's no pre-measures that we took or that we can use in order to prevent the problem to happen. And that's what I said at the beginning, is that this is the gap that we have, that was identified in the education structure is that such education disruption was not prevented. People, they like the structure didn't thought of it happening, and that's why it shows a little bit of failure in some countries, and that's why we're now trying to conduct a research in order to study, first of all, the efficiency of the TV, of using television as an alternative platform. And also we're studying what other platform beside TV and online and Zoom and Skype, what other platform that we can use in order to make sure that the prevention is there whenever such emergencies happened in the future. And go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention that now that you're testing all these different platforms, it would be very important, I think, to think in the content that we are delivering, but also in the pedagogy. Something that we found is that, for example, all our workshops that we have been doing in Atentamente for several years, we know that they work very well in person. And even, for example, in this program Construyete, it was an emergency, but at the same time, it was a different kind of situation because we were able to go there and to actually work directly with the people. And that has a huge effect. So what do we do now that we have to be in distance, like the social distancing? It's a different situation that we have to think of. And if you think about creating empathy and these bonds, how do you do it with these kind of platforms? So for me, it's a big question. What about TV? What about radio? What about all these things? But I want to mention that we work a lot on evaluating programs through these kind of platforms like Zoom that allow you to make breakout rooms so that participants have the chance to talk among each other and to actually still build a community through dialogue. So what we did is that we created a whole infrastructure to deliver these kinds of workshops where we could have a facilitator, but also many moderators that can be with breakout rooms, with participants talking among each other. And now, as we have now, that you have someone who is kindly taking all the responses and also giving voice to the people that are on the other side of the screen. That was for us super important, and something that was impressive is that the results that we have from the evaluations from in-person workshops were kind of the same. I mean, we have the same effectiveness also when we managed to do these workshops online, but really thinking about how do you create a community, and also how do you address and empathize with the people who's on the other side of the screen. For example, like creating the spaces to do some physical stuff and to really connect with that human and not with the screen, which is very hard since we are not so used to deliver this kind of workshops that are not in person.
Exactly, and yeah, I mean that goes back to what Gerhard mentioned about psychosocial support being in the heart of education, because one of the most important impact that happen is, let's not think of education and social, like let's get out of all of the science and just think of a child. He lost, for example, go to school, and he didn't see his friend for the last 2 months. That's enough for a child to be stressed out and to go in depression. And here what you mentioned is a brilliant idea, like creating community, having like people come together and talk. This is so essential for people to relieve and to just be themselves again. And as I remember, maybe in the previous panel, my brother Anantha, he talked about the neuroscience, which is like how to do something good for like how to do something good in order to raise your dopamine and just activate those good neurotransmitters in your brain, so you are in a better mind state. And this is so important because that bring me to a story. Is that one of the parents that we were talking to about his daughter attending the TV, he literally told me that before that, he was like, before talking to education, I want to ask you a question. My daughter started losing her hair because of the stress. So what I can do in order to to help her. And to be honest, this is back to neuroscience and also psychosocial support. It's our it's our basic needs, right? Is that first, you can't push a student to go attend a TV or be in education if he is not on a good mental state, right? And if he's facing pressure or stress, that will be hard for him to attend. And this is where back to the story and other story. One of the parents told me about his 3 years old kid that after 3 weeks of lockdown, his father discovered that the kid, he was thinking that he was punished, and that's why they were not allowed to go out of the home, or to go out of home. This story brings us to really important issues is feeling talk, right? And back to psychosocial support, social emotional learning, and we have to open again back to family environment. We have to open that environment for our kids to have feeling talk with their parents, so the parent can understand their status, and also the kids can vocabulate the feeling, what they're feeling of, in order to overcome or prevent any challenges. And this is where with Mercy Corps, what we did is we conducted videos with several activities that parents can do inside the home in order to open that connection with their children. And one of those activities, for example, is storytelling. Storytelling is a very strong tool that can be used in transferring the coping skills from the parent to their children, especially for such environments. So yeah, I mean, social emotional learning. But what you mentioned, Emiliana, is something very important. And I maybe I want to know more about how is the outcome, what are the feedback from the people being in such community and online community also.
And yeah, I think
please, Gerhard.
Now, I think one of the beautiful things about social and emotional learning and psychosocial support in education in emergency context is also that it seems that those children who are most affected by adversity and who accumulate the most stress factors are those who are potentially most benefiting from it. And we see especially strong responses from children who are deeply affected by adversity. And whether it's, based on my experience, this is not dependent on a specific context, whether it's in the Gaza Strip, whether it's in the Eastern Ukraine buffer zone, whether it's in Lebanon or anywhere else. The reaction for those children who are most affected is very strong. And it's not only the children where it has an impact. I mean, for school-based interventions, we see that it has an impact on the interaction between the children, but also a very strong impact on the interaction between students and teachers. It creates a very positive climate, and also it creates a different dynamic with caregivers, with the parents, especially if the caregivers are included in such interventions. And yeah, I think that's the beauty of the thing.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have this systemic approach and to really care about the social and emotional well-being of children, but also of all the professionals in education and in families. And from the point of view of neuroscience that you were mentioning, Omar, I also want to point out that we know from international organizations that this is not only a physical health crisis, but also a mental health crisis that is gonna last probably for a longer time. And we see that families, for example, that have been lucky that they are not sick, or that no one in their family have any of these physical problems, they have been all been touched by the problems of this mental health crisis. And something that we can see definitely is that this stress response, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, And that brings you into the fight or flight on the survival mode. And this obviously affects, for example, in early childhood development. We know the problems that toxic stress can create in the early childhood, with the architecture of the brain is just being developed. And we really have to take care of that. I'm very happy to say that in the Ministry of Education also, there are programs for early childhood. And there's a lot of training. Last year, I was training a lot of the professionals who are working on their environment so that they could have tools to calm themselves, first of all, as the adults that are in contact with the child, but also to have a contact and good communication with the families and share this co-responsibility on the development of children in this particular age, and of course in every other age. But I think that early childhood, to take care about the stress response, is really urgent and important.
Yeah, there's definitely a few themes that are emerging. I think one is the role of the family and the role of the parents in today's context. Something we know from education emergencies is we emphasize the role of the teacher. There's teacher trainings. We know that we need to support the psychosocial and mental health context of the teachers. And then we have families as well, but not families as the educator or families as the facilitator. I think that's like a newer angle in this, in today's reality. Something else that I've heard is it sounds like the self-directed self-learning academic skills for the older children, high school, middle school kids. When it comes to the smaller kids, younger children, the 3, 4, 5-year-olds, self-directed learning is not as easy as I think most of us can attest to, but also how resilient that age group is to the story that you shared, Omar, as well. We're getting some questions, so I'm going to go ahead and just throw. This is also related to the tech aspect. One question is, in communities with no internet access, how can you promote building a community with physical distancing in place? How do you promote teamwork and social cohesion in a context like that?
I can share the model that we have. This model is based actually on neuroscience and noticing that social and emotional learning skills, of course, are built together, but also something that you can work if you work with your mind. For example, we know that if you train your awareness, your attention, if you learn to have a calmer mind, that breaks this stress response and allows you to have a wider perspective and think about other things and connect to others in whatever situation it's new. So actually to bring this attention, awareness practices that can be through mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of the body. So this is very important and very easy to practice. And you feel connected to others when you are all doing, for example, a mindfulness practice in a space. The second one is that we call it the B for benevolence of big-heartedness. And big-heartedness is not about hugging others, but it's actually to be able to change your focus from me, my survival, my needs, to caring for others. So instead of being afraid of someone is getting closer, what is going to happen to me, how can I care for my community? And this is a change of mindset. You don't need to be touching each other, right? And you can feel when someone is actually attending and how can I care for you? And if I use the mask and if I use all this, it's because I'm caring about you. The third one is about learning to work with your thoughts. We call it clarity. So we need really to learn how to identify these dysfunctional and automatic thoughts that come up to our minds. So for example, I'm gonna get sick, this is not working, my kids are not learning, I'm a very bad mom, maybe I'm punished, I don't understand this. So all these thoughts really are feeding our emotions of anxiety and emotions of fear. And we can learn to identify it and to work with these thoughts. And you don't need to do it like together with other people. And then the sense of purpose, which is the D, we call it the D for direction. And so to be thinking what is important now. And I think that what is important now is really to think about well-being. What does that mean? So if you have that purpose of well-being and also compassion towards others, if you can embed that even in a framework of ethics, that really is a big protector. And it's something that allows you also to build a vision, a common vision with others. So if we can work on these very simple 4 things, A for attention, B for big-heartedness, C for clarity of mind, and D for direction, that is something that we can do in any environment. And it's something simple, it's something short. You can have a piece of knowledge here, a piece of practice there, and you can do it in social distancing, and it's effective, and it's based also on research.
Good, so go ahead. Yeah, so in Iraq, to be honest, it was hard, and it's still hard, and we're thinking of it, and like, because there's a lot of criteria that plays around bringing people together, even with physical distancing, or how to bring up an idea that put people all together. That have been a huge challenge for us, because like lack of internet, lack of tools that internally displaced people they have, and also again, government restrictions and all of these criteria play a big role in it. So that's why, if we want to think of it, there's the benefit around being among your friends and your community. We are not thinking of this in the moment, and that's why we switch our thoughts in order to strengthen the home environment itself and the home base itself, because this is where the safest, and like for COVID, this is where the safest area that you can practice your let's say social practices along with your family. But what needs to happen is for the parents to lead it, for the parents to be more aware on not to judge, not to play the role of the leader more than to play the role of a friend. And this is what we are focusing on right now, especially because Iraq context with COVID. I mean, when there is lockdown imposed by the government, people they don't adhere to it, and also number of cases are hugely increasingly going up every single day. So that's why externally we're not able to do it, but more that's why we put all of our focus to make those interactions goes internally inside the family.
Gerhard, did you want to say something, or can I pose something? Okay, it's a bit weird with us being on the screen. One question we just got is, what are the best ways to get parents involved? There is a lot of talk. Parents are at the center. Parents are also juggling work, sicknesses, other family members in their households that they need to take care of, and the list goes on and on. So what are some best practices from your work that can be used to engage parents, to get parents on board, to get parents on the steep learning curve of how now to be a teacher, a care, all the various hats that parents now are being forced to be?
I think the approaches that I have seen that were most effective in this regard were the ones that have very explicitly aimed for the inclusion of parents in the design phase. So parent engagement was part of the design phase of the approach, of the program, of the project. And there was lots of consultations with the teachers, with the community on how this could happen and how this could work, and tailoring it to the availability. Also have some kind of gender lens on this. So, I mean, are you aiming only for the mothers, or are you also aiming for the fathers? And what is the availability time-wise? What can they dedicate? What is realistic to achieve? And I think if such considerations are included from the outset, and it involves a dialogue with the community and with the schools, I think that's probably the best way to progress.
I could add,
go ahead, Emiliana.
Thank you. I just could add to that an emphasis on self-care has been very effective, because parents and families are burned out. So if you can give them something that it's for them, and instead of what do I have to do for my child and everything, that's very effective.
And adding to all of that, that was all like, yeah, and adding to all of that, in order to do this, and one of the most important thing to develop with parents is trust. what you need to do is to build trust between you and the parents, so they're freely sharing with you what is their fears towarding themselves, toward their children, and also toward education itself. Because currently, right now, one of most of the problems that we're facing is that parents, they are afraid, even if schools are open, they're afraid to send their kids back to school. And they are, because they don't trust the school and its hygiene. So building trust with parents in order to hear all of the fears and commit yourself in identifying them. And again, by that you can put them on the design phase in order for your activities to tackle their own fears.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to add is what I've noticed too is it really requires the whole ecosystem. So even parents, employers having a better understanding of what it is if they're employed. If they're not employed, that's a whole other issue in terms of socioeconomic ability to even just provide, and the stress that they're going through because that they don't have that income stream. But also just allowing time to go get groceries, carving out those various things that you need to do in a world where you also have your kids at home with you that you're needing to teach them. The other thing that I've found works well is honestly, and Gerhard, you kicked us off with this, is that focus on SEL and psychosocial mental health, rather than a focus on literacy and numeracy and making sure our students or our children are reaching those great standards. One thing I know we've heard a lot is that those hard skills will come. There is catch up. We know what works in terms of that accelerated learning, and what we need to really focus on is the mental health of our learners and of ourselves as parents. The one thing we didn't get a chance to address, and I'll just throw it out really fast, so before we wrap up, is how do we reach the most marginalized, those children that already pre-COVID, pre all of this, were already not really learning, we're not accessing quality education. Is there any advice that we can give for educators, school systems, governments that are now starting to think about what education will look like moving forward to be able to reach those most marginalized even before the pandemic?
Well, I think there are those who were not in school before, and I think there are those who will likely never return to school. I think this is also a group that we have to take care of, and especially again from a gender lens, but also children with disabilities, and how can we get those marginalized children who are at the risk of dropping out, how can we retain them? And I think these are probably, I don't want to classify one group over another, but I think those who are already in touch, if we can stay in touch with them and make sure that they return to school, I think that could be comparatively achieved with lower resources than reaching children who are already out of school.
For those group of people, I think also it's a 360 relationship. So for the marginalized, it depends on their case. But for example, in Iraq, we have around 45,000 kids are like perceived to be affiliated with ISIS, and those people, those kids, that the government, they're not giving them, for example, an Iraqi ID. So it's not just that they don't go to education, but they're prevented from their basic rights and the country. So here, which is very important for any successful program, is to enhance its advocacy activities in order to reach out to government to see how they can change policy to make sure that there is access for those marginalized group. And beside government, also enhancing the awareness activities for parents. And here, when we're talking about girls and going to education for a context like Iraq, this is a community traditions that need to be that need to be dealt with. This is a parents' mentality that need to be aware in order to put them in. And the last part of the 360 is as Gerhard mentioned is that the participants or the beneficiaries themselves is just to listen to them, plan with them, and move it forward.
Something I will add is that, for example, from the Ministry of Education, some states have a system for early detection of these children. So I think that's kind of support from more of the policy. It's very important but also to empower the teachers, to give them space to identify, to get closer to the families, to open this dialogue is super important. And also to bring awareness among the students who are surrounding, because also the peer-to-peer relationship can be very, very important and can change a lot of the mentality and also bring awareness of what other things can be done in this particular context.
Yeah, that's great. I think we really should view COVID as an opportunity to take things that we know have worked or could possibly work in the education and emergencies context and truly try it. I think a lot of times we just talk and say, yeah, we know that this works, but to truly see it being implemented in education systems worldwide, thinking about those who are already marginalized, thinking about the ones that don't have access currently or pre-COVID, but thinking about things that, Gerhard, that you said, the gender lens, making sure kids with disabilities are included, making sure that there's a social justice angle. I mean, there's so much work to be done, and it's now even more compounded with everything that's happening. I wish we had more time to continue this wonderful discussion. I want to thank our panelists for engaging in a really rich conversation that I think only started to pull the threads that there's multiple threads that we can pull, and we could probably stay here for hours discussing. Hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do this again. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Adams. And thank you again, Emiliana, Gerhard, and Omar. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Karine.
Thank you.
Hi, Carine, and thank you to all the panelists. Such a great job. And the good news is that we're actually going to continue on with this conversation. Just before we do, I wanted to share with the participants that the very essence of Karanga is a global organization, a global alliance for social emotional learning and life skills. And what we really encourage you to do is to go and check out and sign up. We're at the process right now of gathering resources, and we would really like to have resources and links to resources from all parts of the world and in multiple languages so that everyone has access to the great work that is happening out there. So please feel free to sign up and share your work, your research, your practices, your resources in the mother tongue that you speak in your area. So thanks for that. Carine and her team were talking about some of the ways that education is being delivered and social emotional learning is helping children in education situations in emergencies. And our panel is going to continue on talking about that idea of hybrid learning. And for many of us in the Western world, our schools, after being closed for so long, are merging into some sort of a hybrid where some of it is remote learning, some of it is going to be back in class. We have a lot to learn from places around the world that have been doing hybrid learning for decades. And so I'm thrilled to introduce to you the panel that we're going to be speaking with today. Kwame is from the University of Sussex. He's going to be leading off with a presentation. And then we're going to go to Neha and Brenda, who are from the STIR Education, and they're going to tell us some stories from India and from Uganda. And we'll finish off with a presentation from Joysy, who is Director of Education at Nesta in the UK. Thrilled to have you all here. And Kwame, you have such an amazing background in coming from Ghana and senior policy analysis for education for all with Global Monitoring Report for UNESCO. Can you share with us some of what you've learned about hybrid learning?
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for the invitation to present at this wonderful conference. What I'm going to do is to share with you, can you see my screen? Hello?
Not yet.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet. I'm going to check out with Matt to see if he can help us out with that.
Working on it here in just a second. The screen sharing is on your end, not on mine, but I'm going to see if I can pull up a...
Oh, dear. I'm sorry about this.
Kwame is just working this out with Matt. That's part of the joys of being online, but we all do this. So luckily we've got people that can help us out, Matt and Kwame. We'll find a solution to this.
Okay, I'm putting your slides up myself here. So just one second.
Perfect, that's a great option.
I'm very sorry about this. I thought I'd got this.
No worries. Here we go. Just let me know when you need to change the slide.
Okay. Is it up?
Yep.
Okay. Can I start now?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry about this. My name is Kwame Akyampong, and I've been working with Luminous Fund and doing some research on out-of-school children and access to schooling in Ethiopia. And what I'm going to share is some of the work that the Luminous Fund has been doing in Ethiopia and some of the lessons that we've learned about that. Can I go to the next screen? So the three key aspects of my presentation. First of all, I'll say something about the Second Chance program that Luminous funds. And then I also talk about the impact of a Second Chance program on the holistic development of vulnerable students. So this is the bit that myself and my team from the University of Sussex did a longitudinal study to see the impact of the program on children who have been out of school. And then I'll finish off by sharing some key takeaways. Next slide. What's the Second Chance program in Ethiopia? One of the challenges that we face in many low-income countries is the huge population of children who are out of school. And many of these children are children who have been to school before, but dropped out, either because of poverty or because they just didn't find learning that the school environment promoted their learning. So the Second Chance program in Ethiopia was an attempt to bring many of these children back into mainstream education, first through a 10-month accelerated learning program. So these are children who are basically disadvantaged, who have had either no education, but majority of them have had some education. They've either been in school for 1, 2, 3 years, and they go through a 10-month program, and then they are after 10 months, then they are reintegrated into the public school system. The program itself, it's, as I've said, it's a literacy program for 10 months. And it has 4 times many reading hours. So the children stay in from morning and off until the afternoon. And the instruction is student-centered, it's activity-based, and there's a lot of focus on a continuous assessment. But I think a key part of the program is also what it does in terms of learning how to learn. One of the things that the program highlights or tries to achieve is to move beyond a view of learning, which is goes beyond simply acquiring literacy and numeracy skills. But it's also about promoting positive learner identity, nurturing the cultural identity through pedagogy. So when we talk about these children, many of them are coming into school. The school environment is an alien environment. And unless the learning is promoted through a pedagogy that enhances their learner identity and enhances their cultural identity, that makes them lose the interest in the learning, and eventually many of them drop out. So it takes children from not recognizing letters to reading passage in 10 months. It also celebrates traditional 5 senses learning methods. So what this means is that the learning is promoted through pleasurable activities, including creating and engaging with visual images and singing, telling stories, etc. So what it tries to do is to create an ecosystem within the environment where children have a capacity and are given the opportunity to use all their senses to learn and to nurture that in the environment in which they are learning. Also, it leverages some of the best research on what we know to work with promoting learning. And learning is not simply about the cognitive aspects, but also the non-cognitive. So it tries to put this together, ensure that as students learn to acquire these basic skills, their own self-worth, self-identity is enhanced. And then the final thing is that, which is key, is making these children intrinsic learners. So the responsibility for learning is shared between the teacher and the learner. So the ability to learn is what is encouraged and is fostered in the program so that the students feel very comfortable with learning. Every child engages in meaningful talk. That's the thing that you find in this kind of environment, and have social interaction. Their value as a person is enhanced through that social interaction. And the teachers also structure many opportunities for different kinds of social interaction and reduce their own talk. So it's a space which creates this environment for children's self-worth to be valued and enhanced. Next slide, please. So what we did was to evaluate this program. The main objective of the program was to get children to after this 10 months instructional program, to transition into the public school system. And a team from the University of Sussex, which I led, tried to track these children to find what happened to them. Because it's one thing, bring them back into the public school system, but also how do you ensure that once they get back into the public school system, they continue to learn and be successful. And our results were quite remarkable, because what we found on all the measures in terms of achievement, in terms of completion, particularly in terms of resilience, we found that among the poorest households, the luminous children complete primary school at a much higher rate. We also saw that they had higher aspiration compared to a control group. So there was something about the program that was turning these children who had dropped out of school, who did not feel schooling was for them, to become certainly very successful and to progress beyond the 10 months program. And what we were trying to understand was, why did this happen? What was it that transformed their learning experiences to become such successful learners? Next slide, please. So what are the key takeaways? I think there are 3 things that I want to highlight. One was that the second chance pedagogy positions students to learn how to learn. And I think this is very important. The responsibility for learning is shared between the student and the teacher. So there's inclusive participatory pedagogy, which instills confidence in students in their capacity as learners. And I think for many of these students who have lost this capacity for learning because they failed in the first place and are dropped out, suddenly finding that they actually have a capacity to learn. It's something which enables them to be successful beyond the 10 months program. The other thing is the pedagogy that is used by the Second Chance program. There's group work. Some of the research we know about how effective learning takes place. There's questioning. There's a lot of teaching, and they use a lot of teaching and learning materials. But also crucially, the use of the mother tongue, which is what is linked to what I said earlier about their cultural identity. That language is the medium through which they learn. And there's also opportunity for them to demonstrate and explain what they are learning. And then there's also flexibility in the whole planning of the learning space. And then there's the role of the teachers. I think very often you find the teachers say a lot in the classroom. What we are seeing is that the facilitators' attitudes towards the ability of all students to learn. I think it's very important that they believe that all children can learn, and they communicate that through their interaction with the children. And I think that it's a very important point. And then the last point there is the children having a sense of safe spaces to learn. and a collective responsibility for learning is something that is promoted. Finally, the last slide. So what are some of the key takes in terms of the future of learning? I think that one of two things stand out very clearly. One is that the second chance pedagogy for us offers a vision of the future of successful learning. That has two implications. One, it provides the additional evidence and confidence in the relative importance of hybrid learning models because of how it offers all children, irrespective of their socioeconomic background, opportunity and space for inclusive learning. And I think if you see the environment in which it's very inclusive, it promotes that inclusivity in terms of the activities in the classroom. But I think my final point is about maybe this is a chance for us to think about the implications for schooling post-COVID, schooling systems. Because you see, for many of these children, they have experienced a COVID environment before we all experienced COVID. Many of them were children who had been excluded. And in school, not just because they were out of school, simply, I mean, we are now talking about children going back to school, but many children go back to school and don't learn. So simply opening schools doesn't mean children would learn. And many of these children were actually excluded, even though they were present in school. So I think we need to reflect on what we mean by getting schools opened. When for many children, if they go back to school, it doesn't necessarily equate to learning. So I think what we are learning is that if we can create confident learners, then that creates the opportunity for them to sustain their learning, whether they are in school or out of school. And this is, for us, a very important and big takeaway as far as the program is concerned. I'll stop here, and I'm sure there will be questions that I would address later. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for not being able to put up my slides.
Kwame, no problem at all. Thank you so much for sharing that. And what I really loved was your idea of students learning how to learn. And your summary page really talked about the idea of how do we make sure that we're learning from these learners in your second chance program. You talked about the pedagogies that are really effective with these students. And how do we make sure that those pedagogies are being used in all of our schools and in all of our learning environments so that they don't need a second chance, that their second chance is actually their first chance. So great introduction to our discussion. And it's now my privilege to turn it over to Brenda and Neha, who are from STIR Education. They're going to tell us a little bit what that looks like in India and in Uganda. Over to you two.
Yeah, thank you. Jennifer and everybody. I'm just going to broadly share. Are you able to see my screen?
We are, Neha. It looks good.
Okay. I'll just turn it into a slideshow mode. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So essentially just a very quick overview of what STIR Education does globally. And a large part of our work is to support education systems to reignite intrinsic motivation at teacher and official levels and to role model foundations of lifelong learning for every child within the systems in the geographies where we work. And as part of our program, we've identified the core foundations of lifelong learning, and these are essentially social-emotional outcomes at student level, such as engagement, curiosity, critical thinking, and also the intensity and intentionality of teaching that every child receives in the classrooms. And the idea is for promoting this, all these foundations of lifelong learning through role modeling of, where teachers and system officials role model some of the behaviors and thereby promote it at the child level as well. The way the program really works is, and the broader approach of our program is structured really around the broader principles of setting up these peer networks. And the idea is to strengthen the social connections and the peer connections amongst teachers and system officials so that they're able to foster mutual support and sustained improvement of their practices and their day-to-day activities in schools through getting feedback on what's working well and what's not working well, as well as having a lot of reflection and action planning exercises during these network meetings or the peer network groups that we do establish. And the idea is to allow the teachers and system officials as part of these peer networks to really thrive and move along their professional journey while they are also exhibiting and promoting some of the foundations of lifelong learning that I just described. And essentially all our programmatic activities are based around the three core principles of peer networks, action feedback, and reflection. Most of the peer networks before the COVID situation that hit us here in India, what used to happen in person. And I think as soon as we were very fortunate in India, specifically in our program in Delhi, where the government was in a state of readiness to move to a broader hybrid or a blended approach where we could shift all these network meetings to a virtual mode through Zoom or through WebEx or through other platforms that the system was comfortable using. And what's really worked well, and we've seen a broader shift from the network meetings that used to happen in person versus the blended approach, has been mostly in terms of there's been an increased participation and engagement of teachers and HOSs during these peer network meetings that happen. And a large reason of that has been where teachers feel that they've had, unlike the physical network meetings that used to happen in person, the challenge was for teachers to find time within the school hours to be part of these network groups. And I think that's been one thing that's really worked well for moving to a virtual mode. The other aspect that's really worked well has been providing a lot of training that has happened at the system official level, at the district official level, has been on developing virtual facilitation skills and really seeing how teachers as well as system officials in Delhi are able to implement some of the aspects of virtual facilitation through the various platforms that are being introduced. And most of them are Zoom and WebEx right now. While there's been increased participation and engagement, I think some of the broader challenges that we've been able to identify when we've shifted from an in-person to a virtual mode has been largely around, there's been very limited follow-up on what are the kind of action plans that teachers are developing as part of these peer network meetings that are happening. And it's been really hard and challenging to really get a sense of what is actually, what are some of the things that the teachers are actually able to plan and implement as part of their remote engagement plans for students, because schools are shut down. And the focus of most of the discussions in the network meetings has been around planning remote engagement activities. Along with that, I think there's also this broader challenge that's there, that most of the remote engagement activities that are being discussed or brainstormed on as part of the virtual modes of peer networks have, while I think some of the great ideas are being generated, but I think the broader link of how that leads to the broader student outcomes, or what is it that the system really wants to achieve as part of planning these remote engagement or the broader hybrid or blended approach engagement during the COVID times for the students in Delhi, that kind of understanding is currently lacking within the system. And that's been a huge challenge where we're working with the system to see how we can move ahead in that direction in a planned way. Very quickly, in terms of broader plan for our way forward, is one of the things that we are working on is to identify some of the core thematic areas for the teacher network meetings with the system. And a lot of this is co-designed and co-developed and co-identified in terms of what these thematic areas can be for teachers, and what are some of the things that is essential or important for us to prioritize. And some of the thematic areas that are emerging in order to link it to the broader outcomes at the student level is socio-emotional well-being of teachers, as well as how do we really promote socio-emotional well-being for students. In terms of also putting together an action plan in terms of how do we effectively follow up on action plans that teachers do prepare as part of the virtual meetings is we have been able to do some reflection, and we are also putting together a plan in place to do some reflection exercises that teachers can complete as part of Google form. And there's been a good response in terms of how teachers have been using the feature of Google Forms and being able to do those kind of exercises in the past as well. So one of the way forwards is to plan those reflection exercises for teachers. The aspect of practice and feedback, which is one of the core principles that we want to incorporate in all our activities, is, and it's really hard to do it as part of the virtual meetings that are being planned currently, but some ideas in terms of how teachers can share pre-recorded videos and audio clips to get feedback on what are the activities or plans that they've put together in place to connect with their students, to address the social emotional well-being as well as other thematic areas that are being identified, and get feedback from their peer groups on platforms like WhatsApp and other social platforms, which the system is, and we found that WhatsApp has really helped the stakeholders to engage in terms of these peer support networks that are there. So these are some of the ideas that we're thinking of implementing as part of incorporating practice, follow-up and action plans, as well as being clear about what our thematic areas could be. I'll request Brenda to share about the Uganda experience with regards to the COVID response plans that we've done.
And unlike India, like my colleague Neha has shared, in Uganda, we have a different situation based on the low technological advancement. And one of the key things we've done is being able to engage with the Ministry of Education and Sports to see what is the best platform that can enable us incorporate the blended approach to be able to support our teachers, which at the end of it all, this is able to reach out to the learner. So what we have been doing is we've been prioritizing the use of the mobile phones, where we have weekly support calls with the officials. The purpose of these calls is to mainly check what plans do they have in place when it comes to supporting head teachers, who in turn are able to reach out to their teachers to ensure that much as there is the COVID pandemic, teachers are able to stay motivated. Teachers have the opportunity to get support from their head teachers, but also from the officials at large. And this includes the district education officials, but also officials from the teacher colleges. We've also had bi-weekly head teacher conference calls, which conference calls are basically facilitated by the officials. The purpose of these calls is to give head teachers the opportunity to share their reflections on what is it they are doing to support their teachers during this COVID pandemic, but also based on one of the strategies, which is around having the weekly continuous professional development sessions for teachers, being a very great opportunity for these head teachers to share their reflection on how they think the continuous professional development session went, what are some of the plans they have in place to see that their teachers are motivated, but their teachers are also being able to pick out key highlights from the radio-based CPDs and then include it in their planning as they prepare for readiness to return, that is post-COVID. But also, as we have, the government is running learner lessons on radio, seeing how teachers can use this as they go to deliver the learner lessons during the radio. We've also, in partnership with the Ministry of Education, organized monthly Zoom meetings with the principals and deputy principals outreach of the teacher colleges. And the purpose of this conference is to increase on their understanding of the focus that teachers are having through the radio programs, but also act as an opportunity for them to come up with clear plans on how they are able to support officials as they in turn give effective feedback to the head teachers. Neha, next. Thank you. In terms of what we've been able to learn during this COVID pandemic, one has been around the excitement among the stakeholders. Most of the interventions in Uganda were targeting the learner. So in partnership with the ministry, when we came up with a program that is targeting the teacher, targeting the head teacher and the officials, this is something that they received very well. And some of them were making comments such as they're excited that finally the Ministry of Education and Sports is including them as key stakeholders in education planning. We've also had officials saying that they are excited that they have the opportunity to continue supporting teachers as part of the improvement to see that there's continuity of learning, but seeing that teachers remain motivated and ready to return to schools when when lockdown is uplifted or when COVID comes to an end. We've also been able to leverage on the WhatsApp platforms where we share a summary of what the radio program is all about. And then the head teachers and teachers are able to tap into those WhatsApp platforms so that they share their reflection, key learnings, and also share some of the plans that they have in place to help them improve further based on ideas that they learn from one another. However, I must recognize that what we are using to measure this success is something that we are gathering from the different platforms that we use to interact with the different stakeholders, specifically because we are not involving in our usual rigorous data collection. We've been able to experience some challenges such as network connectivity, which makes it hard for all head teachers and officials to be part of the conference calls at the time that is planned. As we leverage on the system to deliver these CPD sessions, in some districts, we do not have enough center coordinating tutors who are the bridge between the primary head teachers and then the intervention. So this makes it quite challenging, and we are trying to address this through engagement with the district education officials to see how some of the outstanding head teachers are brought on board to coordinate these head teacher conference calls. And then finally, just like a challenge highlighted in India, it's more around the follow-up on the action plans that are created by these officials, but also by the head teachers after the conference calls. So at the end of it all, we recognize that the head teacher has a very critical role when it comes to them modeling the behaviors that they expect to see in learners. And for the head teacher to be able, to model this, they need role modeling from the different players within the system, which is very critical if we are to realize lifelong learning. Thank you so much.
Neha and Brenda, thank you so much. It was really interesting hearing from both of you from the same organization, because you have the program that's up and running with some commonalities to it, but we see what it looks like in two different contexts and with different methodologies based on connectivity, et cetera. Really like the idea that you're investing in teachers, because one thing that we know for sure is that in order for children to be developing their social emotional learning skills, their teachers, we have to invest in the teachers so that they're developing those skills. So thanks so much. We're going to have an opportunity for a quick question after hearing from our next panelist, who is Joysy John. And Joysy is Director of Education with Nesta, a group that's been doing some really interesting work out of the UK. And Joysy, over to you. I know that some of the participants are wondering if they'll get access to your slides, everyone's slides. And yes, we will have them posted on karanga.org at the end of it. So Joysy, over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Great to hear the various discussions around supporting social and emotional learning during COVID-19. So many of you might not have heard about Nesta. Nesta is a global innovation foundation based in UK. And for the last 20 years, we've been making change happen through research, experimentation, funding, and influencing policy. And today I wanted to just share a few key lessons. Let me just share my screen. Okay, are you able to see my screen now? Great. So, you know, over the last 3-4 months, we've learned a lot by working with our grantees, by talking to school leaders and multi-academy trust leaders here in the UK. And what I wanted to do today was, first of all, time myself so that I don't overrun. And secondly, I wanted to just share very quick lessons that we've learned. So 3 big lessons that we have learned in supporting social and emotional learning during COVID-19. So the three big lessons. First of all, it's about shared goals, partnerships. It's about building the right partners and having an aligned mission. Secondly, it's about making sure that the pace of learning is personalized to the learner and to the context. We've heard time and time again during this conference that context, devices, network connectivity matters, and it needs to be personalized for the learner. And finally, offline is as important as online, and that's where the concept of a hybrid model comes in. So if anything, if you were to take away three big things from this talk, it's about 1, partnerships, 2, about personalization, and 3, around parity between offline and online. And what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes is to just give you some examples for each of those 3 lessons. So the first one is around partnerships, and this is the edu.school. You can see that this is a partnership across Charland, which is a multi-academy trust based in Birmingham, Glue, which is an edtech company, and the Trauma Response Network, funded by Nesta. We brought these organizations together to make sure that we are bringing very disparate strands together, which builds in expert learning in an online setting, but also within the classroom setting. And it brings in some of the concepts around looking after yourself, helping others, and helping the wider world. And it blends both the academic learning with well-being of students. Now, what are we doing here? It's a 7-week pilot in Birmingham and Black Country, where year 10 students, the disadvantaged students who are being given laptops and internet connectivity by government, we are providing a wraparound support, delivering content that's really customized. But at the same time, using tools like Microsoft, Power BI, Office 365, and Teams to really support these learners and bringing these very different organizations together to make sure that the content is purpose-built. The curriculum itself is underpinned by a comprehensive analytics engine, ensuring visibility, accountability, accurate judgment, engagement, as well as making sure that there is correct level of progression and teacher connection to students, both inside or outside the classroom. Because some of these schools are bringing kids in, especially for vulnerable kids and kids of key workers. This is really interesting because not only are we bringing different partners together, but we're also doing an impact evaluation with whole education, and we should have our results in 7 weeks' time. So I'm really excited about this pilot that we are running to help the most disadvantaged kids. The second thing I wanted to talk about was around personalization of learning. And Skills Builder is one of the winners of our EdTech Innovation Fund, where they are focused on providing online tools that help build key employability skills. So they've got these 8 skills: listening, speaking, problem solving, creativity, staying positive, aiming high, leadership, and teamwork. And for each of these 8 skills, they have 15 levels. And students complete an activity in class, and then teacher does a quick assessment of where they are. So they can not only get an assessment from the teacher, but they can also do peer-to-peer assessment, understanding where they stand for each of those skills and what sort of things that they can do to build those skills. So they get, depending on the baseline, they then get to see different resources to help build each of these skills and activities that support their learning. Now, this tool was initially being used within classrooms by teachers and students, and during COVID-19, they have supported online learning and remote learning. The funding that Nesta is providing will support improvements in the user experience, as well as an evaluation of the impact that the Skills Builder platform is making on building social and emotional skills. So it is important that we remember to personalize learning and not expect everyone to progress at the same level. And this is one of the tools among many others in our portfolio of the EdTech Innovation Fund that is supporting personalization of learning. And the final thing I wanted to mention is the Future Ready Fund. And as we know, mental health, well-being is crucial, and it has become even more crucial during COVID-19. So the Foundation for Positive Mental Health is an organization that we are supporting through the Future Ready Fund, which specifically looks at social and emotional skills in secondary school students. It's a 9-week program where they have used an audio using an app that builds self-esteem, resilience, and motivation in young people. And this is a very simple concept. It's just using an audio track. But through a 9-week program, as well as through teacher training, as well as creative group activities, learners are able to build not only academic confidence, but also personal and social confidence. This is a tool that is initially used in the health setting as part of NHS Digital, and Nesta's grant funding is helping them take it to secondary schools. And given the tremendous response that they have seen during COVID-19, we've given them a follow-on grant funding to increase their reach and scale and build greater evidence and improve the product based on feedback from learners. I'm just going to play a very quick video of 30 seconds to give you a sense of what we are trying to achieve with the Future Ready Fund. This is just one example of an organization we're supporting. There are 9 other organizations. And I'm going to play a very quick clip which shows how offline is just as important as online. Can you hear this?
Underprivileged a lot of people are in the Northwest and how underfunded schools are. So organisations just like Nesta who are helping us, really try and support the young people as much as we can.
The Future Ready Fund seemed perfect with its focus on social and emotional skills and its focus on impact. It's exactly what we were looking to articulate, and the fund has been really helpful getting us to a point where we can really speak about our impact in a tangible way.
So it's a much longer video, but I wanted to just give you a short clip around the need for online and offline to be blended. And a lot of the grantees, for example, Football Beyond Borders, Franklin Scholars, Voice 21, which was supporting learners in a very face-to-face intervention, are now all shifting online, are supporting their learners online. So a very quick whistle-stop tour of the work that we've been doing at Nesta to support social and emotional learning in a hybrid model. And with that, I'll pass it back to Jennifer. Thank you.
Joysy, thank you so much. Really interesting to see the work that you're doing and your organization is doing. And actually, you gave me a great segue into the one question that I'm going to turn back over to the 4 panelists. We know that mental health is something that we are very concerned about globally around the world. All of our students are facing challenges, and certainly with COVID-19 and in a remote or a distant situation, it's really tough to be monitoring their mental health and to providing the supports that they need. Can any of you talk a little bit about what that's looking like in the blended learning environment in your context?
I'll start off. So, it really varies depending on the context. So even though UK is considered as a developed nation, I think there are 1.3 million kids who are going without food, and government has been extending the free school meals over the school holidays. There are thousands of kids without proper internet access or devices, or where they are living in homes where they don't have a safe and quiet learning environment. So my key takeaway is that the support that's needed for mental health will vary depending on the context. And if you look at the minority ethnic groups or Black kids, they are probably suffering even more, not just because of school closures, but also because of higher risks of deaths and illness. So the anxiety that comes with losing your parent or your teacher due to COVID-19 is amplified during this time. So it is a really challenging environment, even in a country like UK. So I can only imagine what the challenges will be in some of the developing countries.
Thanks, Joysy. A very similar situation in Canada. When I talk to my colleagues that are running education systems here, exactly, really worrying about those kids that we worry about when they're in a school environment, let alone when we don't have that direct access to them. So thank you. Kwame, I think you were going to jump in.
Yes, I was going to say that I think the other thing we need to keep in mind is that the schooling environment can be an environment where some of those needs can be met. And in the program that Luminous funds in Ethiopia, what this classroom environment does is to create an environment which helps children to develop those kinds of resilience that they can use to cope with the challenges they faced in life. So I think, you know, when learning is not simply about, and I think this has been stressed in this conference, it's not simply about what children can pick up in terms of the cognitive aspect, but how you build the modes in which you use to encourage them to be able to engage with the environment, with the challenges they face, to negotiate, to talk about it. So there's a lot of talking that children are encouraged to do, to reflect. And I think all of that is building in them those intrinsic skills to be able to cope with some of the challenges they may face outside. So yes, we cannot, you know, necessarily track in, you know, and see how they cope with the challenge. But I think the school should be the space where we prepare them to be able to engage with some of those challenges they face out there. But oftentimes the classroom environment is simply about getting them to read and write, and not creating a pedagogy that allows them to build those kind of skills that can allow them to face the challenges they meet outside. And I think this is what the Luminous program does quite well in terms of the kinds of learning environment it creates for the children to negotiate, to talk about learning, to reenact what they are learning, and have space to engage in the environment. It's something that builds in them that kind of resilience that I think is needed.
So well said, Kwame. How do we create the space that nurtures mental health in our children? Wonderful ideas. Brenda and Neha, any contributions from your end?
Yeah, I think I'll quickly share what I've seen in India and specifically in New Delhi, and what the government out here has done, and we've supported them through our program. Is, I think what Kwame was saying earlier is that, you know, the whole idea of school systems and teachers being able to provide opportunities for students to feel safe, creating that safe environment and space is not just during the COVID, but overall as well. And one of the focus areas that we've looked at is also how teachers are able to connect with their students, whether when they are in school or even during the COVID situation. And a lot of this teachers here in India, and specifically I'm sharing the Delhi experience, have really been able to not necessarily monitor the mental health or the social emotional well-being of children, but more in terms of just simply picking up the phone and reaching out to the students to connect with them and just checking on them in terms of how they're doing. We've had a lot of stories where they have done these telephonic conversations with students as well as parents to build awareness about what they can do with regards to the COVID situation. And I think that's the starting step to ensure that their students feel safe and secure during this COVID situation. That's what's happened here.
Brenda, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. In the Ugandan scenario, I think one of the key things that is happening to ensure that students' health is something that is monitored is more around using the existing system. As in terms of our approach, we focus through strengthening the systems, and we have officials out there, for instance, the center coordinating tutors, who have the responsibility of working closely, mobilizing the community, the parents, even post-COVID, to see how best they can support their learners during this time. One of the other things being done is some of the teachers, based on guidelines provided by government, are also able to reach out to some of the learners that are not so close from where they are, just to check on how they are doing, especially that ministry is also sharing with them self-learning material or content to see how these teachers can be able to support these learners during this time, so that they do not struggle on their own, recognizing that some of the parents could not have had the opportunity to go through the formal education system, which makes it difficult for them to support their learners. So those are some of the things going on here. Thank you.
Great comments, Brenda and Neha. That idea of reaching out to the partners that are already doing that work in that space, and really the idea, Neha, we do that, a lot of that in Canada as well. The direction or the request to our teachers to make sure that they're reaching out, because the relationship piece and the trust piece and the connectivity piece is so important during this time of disruption. So on behalf of the participants, I'd really like to thank all four presenters. What a unique opportunity to have the context of India and Uganda and the UK and Ethiopia talked about in one panel. That's great. And I'd just like to end off with a quote, just to make sure that I'm lined up with Louka. Canada, like all places in the world, is thinking about racial justice and injustices. And we have a truth and reconciliation process happening for our Indigenous populations. And one of our senators, Murray Sinclair, who is an Indigenous leader, I was privileged to be able to hear him speak one time. And this was the quote that he said: "Education is what got us here, and education is what will get us out." And I think that's a great way to end our panel discussion. So thank you so much to all of you. And I'm going to hand it over to Matt to close us out for this morning's session. Just a reminder to everybody that the session with Andrea Schleicher is beginning in about 20 minutes. And if you register, you will be sent a link that will allow you to join to that. So thanks very much.
So thank you, everybody. Just here's the link again. I got the slide fixed for you all, so you can see the link down there to register for the session starting in a few minutes. And I just wanted to say it's been a pleasure on my part, on behalf of Committee for Children. I've really appreciated the opportunity to help facilitate this and to play our small part in bringing everybody together for all of the amazing conversation that we've had so far today. For a few final words, I'm going to turn things over to Dominic, who is going to talk a little bit about Karanga and close out the session for us. Close out our session one. So take it away, Dominic.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, Jennifer, Kwame, Brenda, Neha, and Joysy. That was fantastic. There's a brilliant quote from a French novelist writing in the 19th century who said, "There is something more powerful than the brute force of bayonets. It is the idea whose time has come and hour has struck." And I think across all of the organizations involved in organizing today, we really believe that this is true for social and emotional learning. And what we've tried to do across this conference is explore and show the relevance of SEL to some of the most pressing and urgent questions facing all of us. Questions about the role of schools and education in building fairer societies for all of us, and about how learning can best be supported during the COVID-19 crisis. We all believe that SEL delivered and developed in localized contexts is a crucial part of the change that we are all looking for. Now, as Mark said at the very beginning of the conference today, both the SEL and Edu community and Karanga grew out of work around social and emotional learning that Salzburg Global Seminar, Microsoft, QFI, and ETS have been supporting for the last couple of years. And both SEL and Edu and Karanga are relatively young initiatives, and we are still learning. The questions that Aparna posed in her keynote are absolutely as relevant for us as they are for every other organization or initiative that wants to be part of the solution to these big issues. I think the quote from Lilla Watson that Louka shared during the discussion about SEL and social justice: "If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together," perfectly sums up how we hope we can work with educators from around the world. And we would like to do that work with all of you who've been part of this conference. So if you're on Facebook, then please feel free to join the SEL and Edu community. Please subscribe to the Karanga newsletter through our website and work with us to develop stronger advocacy arguments for social and emotional learning. The next newsletter comes out tomorrow, so if you subscribe today, you'll have that to look forward to tomorrow. I'd like to thank all of the speakers and presenters and the teachers who submitted Flipgrid videos, and everyone who joined the conference today for all of your comments and questions. The next SEL online conference will begin on 5th of October, which is World Teachers' Day. We're going to be changing the format slightly so that it will run over the course of the week with shorter sessions at different times of the day. And there'll be more information about that going up on the Karanga website and in the Facebook group in the next couple of weeks. if you can't wait that long for more online SEL discussion, then as Jennifer just said, in about 20 minutes, Jennifer, Emiliana and I are in conversation with Andrea Schleicher from OECD as part of the Knowledge Hook SEL Leadership Series, and links have been shared in the chat for that during this conference. And following the Andrea Schleicher conversation, there is part 2 of today's conference with new speakers exploring the issues that we've been looking at so far today. And recordings of all the different components from today will be on Karanga's YouTube channel in the next couple of days. To close out this part of the conference, I'd like to finish with a quote and share my favorite quote about education from the German philosopher Hannah Arendt, who once wrote that education is the point at which we decide if we love the world enough to take responsibility for it. And I think we have seen some amazing examples of that kind of responsibility taking today. Thank you all so much for being with us. Stay safe and well, and we hope very much to see you all again soon.